Imagine a medieval village at night. The streets are narrow and winding, lined with timber-framed houses whose upper stories lean slightly toward one another, as if whispering secrets across the cobbled lanes. Wooden shutters are closed against the cool air, though the faint orange glow of hearths sometimes slips out through the cracks. Lanterns sway from hooks at doorways, their dim flames struggling against the mist that hangs low, softening the outlines of carts, barrels, and fences left quiet until morning. The smell of wood smoke drifts lazily, mingled with the faint earthy scent of damp straw. Animals settled in their stables, and bread cooling from the evenings. Somewhere nearby, a dog gives a short bark before curling back into its place by the door. The river Athage of the village moves slowly, the moonlight stretching in thin silver lines across its surface, rippling gently with the current. In this world, the pace of life is unhurried, measured by bells, candles, and the steady rhythm of seasons. In such a setting, animals were never distant or abstract. They were woven into every part of life, from work to worship, from superstition to simple companionship. Medieval people lived close to their flocks and herds, their barns and byres, their fields and forests. The crowing of a rooster, the bray of a donkey, the hoot of an owl, these sounds were not background noise but part of the order of things, shaping the hours of the day and the thoughts of the night. With so little light, every sound carried farther, and each animal's presence seemed larger, more filled with meaning. To live in a medieval village was to share space not only with neighbors and family, but also with sheep grazing at the edge of fields, horses stamping in their stalls, and birds that wheeled endlessly above the rooftops. Animals were practical, certainly sources of wool, milk, eggs, and strength in plowing, but they were also mysterious. People believed that every creature carried within it a sign, a symbol, or a lesson. Medieval bestiaries books filled with descriptions of animals, both real and imagined, told readers that each beast reflected a truth about the human soul or the order of creation. The lion, for instance, was thought to represent Christ, mighty and protective. The pelican, seen in art as piercing its own breast to feed its young with blood, symbolized sacrifice. Even the ordinary rooster, greeting the dawn each day, was said to be herald of light, banishing evil with its crow. To the medieval mind, animals were bridges between the natural and the divine, living parables in feather, fur, and scale. At the same time, many creatures stirred unease. Cats, sleek and independent, often seemed too clever, too mysterious. Their glowing eyes in the dark suggested that they might see what humans could not. Some villagers whispered that cats consorted with unseen spirits, and yet they were also valued for keeping barns free of mice. Owls, too, perched in rafters or flew silently through the night, were thought to carry omens in their haunting calls. Even harmless toads and bats could be wrapped in streams of danger or hidden magic. To us, these beliefs may sound strange, but for people who lived without electricity, whose nights stretched long, and whose shadows were deep, the behavior of animals seemed full of meaning. Such beliefs were not only fears but also comforts. A dog's bark could be reassurance, a rooster's crow a reminder that dawn would always return. Horses were not just beasts of burden but steady companions on journeys across muddy tracks or forest paths. Sheep, quietly cropping grass, represented innocence in sermons, but they also provided warmth against the cold when their wool was spun into thick cloaks. The boundary between the symbolic and the everyday was blurred. What an animal meant in story or faith was tied closely to it lived among people. Imagine, then, an evening by the hearth. A family gathers around the fire, the light flickering against the whitewashed plaster of the walls. Shadows stretch across the beams overhead as children listen to elders telling stories about the creatures beyond their door. Perhaps an owl's hoot drifts in through the shutter, and someone murmurs about its reputation as a messenger of unseen things. Or perhaps the family dog steers, and a child is reminded of the loyalty often praised in sermons. These moments, small and repetitive, fell at the long hours of winter nights, when candles and firelight were the only companions to conversation. A journey tonight will move slowly through these beliefs, not with judgment, but with quiet curiosity. We will notice how people once saw the world around them, how they filled the silence of the night with meaning drawn from the creatures they depended on and observed. We will walk gently through barns and fields, through chapels where beeswax candles glowed, and through markets where stories were traded as easily as goods. Each chapter will pause with a different animal or belief, lingering in the details of how medieval people lived alongside their companions, both real and imagined. These stories, though odd to us now, were never meredith. They helped explain the mysteries of nature. They offered lessons in faith and morality, and they gave comfort when the night felt long. To think of them is to step back into a slower world, where silence was deep air, where light was precious, and where animals seemed to carry messages written just for human eyes. Us wander through these chapters. Let us keep the same pace, unhurried, attentive, and open to wonder. Let the lanterns of history guide us softly, the mist of memory settling around us, as we drift toward rest with the gentle company of creatures who once filled medieval nights with meaning. In the stillness before morning, when the village lay wrapped in shadows and the sky showed only the faintest trace of light, one sound rose above the silence, the crow of the rooster. To us today, it may seem ordinary, even unremarkable, but in the world of medieval people, it carried far deeper meaning. For them, the rooster's call was not simply a bird greeting the dawn, it was the signal of safety, the assurance that night had ended, and that light had once again triumphed over darkness. In a time when shadows were feared, when spirits were believed move freely under the cover of night, that first call gave reassurance. It told families resting in timber-root cottages, monks praying in dim cloisters, and shepherds stirring in their fields that the day had begun again. And with it came comfort. The rooster was a familiar figure in every village, perched on a fence or strutting across farmyards, its feathers bright against the dull tones of earth and wood. It was impossible to ignore. Farmers railed on it to rouse them from sleep. Monks trusted its voice to mark the hours of prayer. Children grew used to hearing its cry as a natural part of the rhythm of life. And yet, beyond its usefulness, people wove into its song a thread of meaning. They saw in it a battle fought every night between shadow and light. The bird's punctual voice was thought to scatter spirits, to drive away unseen dangers, and to remind all who listened that no darkness could last forever. Imagine the setting, a medieval farm, long before sunrise. The hearth has burned low, its embers glowing faintly beneath the ash. Outside, the fields lie under a heavy dew, and the air is cool, edged with mist. The family sleeps close together for warmth, wrapped in woolen blankets. Then, breaking thistleants, the rooster crows clear, sharp, and commanding. To the family, that sound was more than an alarm. It was a kind of guardian. It told them that they had passed safely through the night, that unseen spirits were not retreating, and that the world was slowly turning back toward the sun. Even in monasteries, far from the bustle of villages, the rooster's cry held its place. Monks rose at strict intervals through the night to pray, guided by bells and candles. But often, it was the natural world that reminded them of their duties. When the rooster announced the coming of dawn, it was a call not only to prayer, but also to reflection. Its voice echoed across stone walls and cloisters, joining the chants of monks as the day's first hymns were sung. In these sacred spaces, the rooster became a symbol of vigilance, always alert, always faithful, just as the community itself was called Tobe. The rooster was not only heard, but also seen everywhere in medieval life. Villagers painted its image on signs, churches carved it into stone, and weather vanes shaped like roosters crowned rooftops. These weather vanes, often made of iron or copper, turned gently in the wind, keeping watch over towns and farms alike. The image of the rooster reminded people of its role, a watchful guardian of the dawn, a herald of the sun. It was common for churches to place rooster-shaped vanes upon their spires, not only as practical tools to read the wind but also as spiritual symbols, pointing the faithful toward vigilance and truth. Daily life revolved around 30 of them set by animals, and none was more punctual than the rooster. For peasants, whose labor began at first light, it was the natural clock. The day might start with feeding animals, mending tools, or preparing to work in the fields, and all of it was timed to the rooster's song. Before mechanical clocks became widespread, nature provided its own signals, and the rooster's crow was among the most trusted. To wake before the rooster was to wake after it was unusual. Thus, its cry shaped not only belief, but also the very order of daily work. There was also an emotional side to these beliefs. The night in medieval times was not merely dark, it was. Without street lamps or electricity, the world after sunset felt vast and uncertain. The forests that bordered villages grew silent and strange. The wind might howl through trees, owls might call, and the imagination filled in what could not be seen. People believed that spirits or demons might wander in the hours of deepest night. Against this backdrop, the rooster's call was more than sound, it was relief. It was a reminder that the danger had passed, that the boundary between night and day had been crossed, and that the familiar routines of life could return. In markets too, the rooster's presence was noted. Traders would bring chickens for Sally, their baskets alive with feathers and quiet clucking. Buyers did not only see them as a source of food or eggs, but also as keepers of the dawn. A good rooster was prized for his strong, clear crow, which meant a family would not oversleep, and their safety would feel assured. In this way, even in the simple trade of poultry, belief and practicality intertwined. Legends about the rooster stretched further, into stories told around hearths on winter nights. Some tales said the rooster's crow could even banish evil spirits or keep witches at bay. Others claimed that its voice frightened away wandering souls, ensuring they returned to their rest. The rooster held special meaning as well. Its crow was remembered in the story of Peter's denial, armament of sorrow, but also of repentance. Thus, across both folk tales and sacred stories, the rooster stood as a creature tied to truth, vigilance, and renewal. The rhythm of a medieval village was quiet and steady, and Tharister's voice marked its turning. At dawn, the sound carried across fields, bouncing off barns and cottages, weaving into the morning air like a familiar hymn. For children, it was the beginning of play or chores. For adults, it was the call to work, to prayer, to life itself. The belief that its scattered spirits may seem strange to us, but for them, it was an anchor, a gentle assurance in a world often filled with uncertainty. As the day grew brighter, the rooster blended back into the ordinary noise of the farm, clucking hens, barking dogs, the sound of hooves in the mud. Yet, its importance was never forgotten. It had done its work in the early hours, guiding the community from night into day, from fear into comfort. And so, it remained respected, not only as an animal but as a messenger. We can picture the end of such a day, too, when dusk returned and shadows stretched once more across the village. Families gathered by the hearth, sharing bread or soup, while outside the fields grew quiet. In whose hours, the rooster tucked itself among the hens, roosting safely for the night. But people knew that before long, its voice would rise again, clear and strong, reminding them that even the longest night would always yield her morning. The rooster's dawn song was, in truth, a small thing, yet to medieval people, it was woven into the fabric of life. It was a symbol of safety, a mark of time, and a reminder of light's triumph over darkness. In remembering their beliefs, we are reminded of how closely they listened to the world around them, how deeply they tied meaning to the simplest sounds, and how comfort could be found in the cry of a bird that greeted the sun each morning. And so, when we imagine the rooster crowing across misty fields, its sound echoing over timbered homes and stone chapels, we are not only hearing an animal, we are hearing centuries of reassurance, faith, and tradition. It is a reminder that history is not always written in grand events, but often whispered in the quiet songs of everyday life. In the hush of medieval evenings, when the day's labor had ended and families gathered near the hearth for warmth, a quiet companion often appeared in the glow of the fire. The cat, small, sleek, and ever watchful, the cat carried a presence that was at once ordinary and mysterious. Unlike dogs, who barked and bounded with loyalty, cats seemed to move on their own terms, slipping in and out of doorways with a grace that belonged neither entirely to the household nor to the wild. To watch a cat sit near the flames, eyes gleaming like lanterns, was to witness a creature that lived comfortably in both worlds, part of the home, yet somehow connected to shadows beyond it. Cats earned their place at the hearth through simple necessity. Grain was the lifeblood of a medieval household, stored carefully in bins or sacks to feed families through the winter months. But where grain lay, mice and rats soon followed, eager to steal from the stores. Cats proved to be quiet guardians, their presence a natural defense against such pests. A single cat could protect a family's food more reliably than traps or human watchfulness. This practical role made them welcome in cottages and barns, where their silent work was noticed even if they remained aloof. In the rhythm of daily survival, the cat was more than a companion. It was part of the household economy, ensuring that the family's bread was safe from hungry intruders. Yet, beyond their usefulness, cats stirred feelings that were harder to explain. Their nocturnal habits, glowing eyes, and uncanny silence gave them an air of mystery. In a world where night was already filled with uncertainty, the cat seemed especially suited to it. Villagers would watch their cat slip outdoors after sunset, tail flicking as it vanished into the mist, and they wondered where it roamed. Did it hunt by barns and hedges, or did it walk in seen paths, moving in spaces people could not follow? Its return in the morning.com and unharmed suggested a knowledge of the night that humans did not share. In this way, the cat became tied to beliefs of luck, secrecy, and sometimes unease. In some households, cats were cherished as protectors of the hearth. Their presence by the fire was a comfort, a sign that the family's home was guarded not only from vermin but also from the intangible unease of the dark. A curled cat radiated calm, its purr blending with the crackle of wood, creating a sense of safety in the room. Children grew up with this association, linking the soft sound of a purring cat with warmth, bread baking, and evening rest. For them, the cat was a familiar friend, a creature that made the long winter nights gentler. But whispers traveled too. Not everyone viewed cats with trust. Their independence soon stole people who valued animals that served openly and loyally. Unlike dogs or oxen, cats did not appear to be. They wandered when they pleased, vanishing for hours, sometimes days. This strange independence made them seem connected to forces beyond human control. Their glowing eyes, catching firelight or moonlight, appeared almost otherworldly. In some tales, cats were thought to see what humans could not spare, its moving in shadows, unseen dangers slipping between walls. And so, while one family might see their cat as a protector, another might wonder if its silent gaze hid secrets too deep to be safe. Despite these doubts, cats remained a fixture in medieval homes. They were too useful to be cast aside, and too enigmatic to be fully trusted. In markets, cats could sometimes be seen wandering between stalls, searching for scraps. Their bodies, sleek from hunting, traders tolerated them, even welcomed them. For a mouse chased away from a sack of grain meant fewer losses in trade. And yet, as the cat prowled among goods and people, it seemed always to remain a part present, but never entirely belonging. Its place in human life was assured, but its spirit seemed to walk a parallel path, one that brushed close to human lives without ever being fully captured by them. Within monasteries, cats found quiet homes as well. Their presence in storerooms, kitchens, and cloisters was practical, keeping parchment and food safe from gnawing pests. Monks, who lived lives of silence and reflection, Sameta admired the cat's stillness, its ability to sit for long hours without stirring, eyes fixed on some unseen point. In this they saw a faint reflection of their own contemplative lives. Yet even here, among prayer and discipline, Theket's independence stood out. It could not be trained to a bell or bound to routine. It wandered freely, slipping between sacred stone walls with the same ease it wandered through humble cottages. Its mystery was unchanged, even in holy spaces. Legends about cats traveled widely, carried in stories told at hearths and around village fires. Some tales praised them as lucky, especially black cats, which in certain regions were thought to bring prosperity to a household. Others, however, carried suspicion, linking cats to witches or spirits. A cat's midnight prowl could be seen as innocent hunting or as something far stranger, depending on the list. These beliefs wove themselves into the culture, shaping how people saw the animals that shared their lives. To own a cat was ordinary, but to think about what that cat represented was to step into the realm of the hearth itself gave the cat its strongest association. In the dim light of evening, the family would sit close to the flames, the smell of stew rising from the pot, bread resting nearby, and the cat curled neatly on the edge of the warmest stone. Its presence was a sign of domestic order, of things being as they should. Without words or fuss, it reminded people of continuity, that even as seasons turned and worries pressed in, some small comforts endured. The flick of its tail, the slow closing of its eyes, the steady rhythm of its purthies, were the sounds and sights of peace. And yet, that same creature could vanish into the night, its shape slipping through a crack in the door, its body dissolving into shadows. No one knew where it went, and perhaps no one truly wanted to. Its return was enough. Its silent reappearance at dawn proof that it carried some understanding of the dark hours that humans lacked. It moved with certainty where people moved with fear, and this gave it an aura of both power and mystery. In the imagination of villagers, the cat was a boundary walker, a creature that lived both in the safety of the hearth and in the uncertainties of the night beyond. Even in art and manuscripts, Cats appeared sometimes as small details in margins, sometimes as figures with symbolic meaning. Illuminated texts might show them chasing mice or sitting beside monks at work, a reminder of their real presence in daily life. These images, though simple, captured the dual role of cats, practical helpers and mysterious companions. They wearied once entirely of this world and faintly connected to something beyond it. As the years passed, these beliefs ended, shaping the way people thought about their feline companions. To stroke a cat's fur as it sat by the fire was to feel comfort. To see it vanish into the night was to wonder about unseen worlds. It was both ordinary and extraordinary, woven into the fabric of life, yet always retaining a part of itself apart from human reach. The cat, in medieval imagination, was never just an animal. It was a symbol, a guardian, a question left unanswered. And so, when we picture a medieval household settling in for the night, we might imagine the soft glow of firelight, the quiet murmur of voices, the smell of wood smoke and bread. Amid it all lies the cat, stretched in comfort, its eyes half closed yet always alert. To the family, it is both protector and mystery, a creature that makes the home feel complete while hinting at the unseen mysteries of the world beyond the door. In its stillness, the cat reminds us of the balance medieval people lived with every day, between safety and danger, between light and dark, between the known and the unknown. The quiet legacy of cats at the hearth lingers even now. Though we no longer fear the night in the same way, and though our food is stored differently, the presence of a cat curled by the fire still carries meaning. It speaks of continuity, of warmth, of calm companionship, and perhaps, deep down, it still whispers of mystery, reminding us that not everything in life is meant to be explained. Some things, like the steady gaze of a cat's eyes in firelight, are best simply accepted as part of the quiet poetry of everyday life. In the deep stillness of a medieval night, when the last embers of the hearth had cooled and the village lay wrapped in darkness, there came a sound unlike any other, the low, haunting cry of the owl. It drifted across fields and through forests, carrying a note that was neither entirely mournful nor entirely soothing, but something suspended between. To hear it was to be reminded that the night belonged to more than sleep. It was a world of its own, filled with creatures unseen, moving in silence where humans dared not tread. The owl, perched high upon a gnarled branch or watching from the roof of a barn, seemed to embody the very soul of the night. Still, mysterious, and filled with hidden knowledge. For villagers, the owl was an ambiguous presence. On one hand, it was admired for its unmatched hunting skills. Farmers knew that fields and granaries could easily fall victim to mice and other pests, threatening precious food supplies that sustained families through hot. The owl, with its keen sight and silent wings, was a natural guardian, sweeping across the land with by moonlight, it hunted in silence, striking swiftly and vanishing again into the dark. Yet this same silence made it uncanny. Unlike other birds, whose calls filled daylight hours with familiar sound, the owl spoke in the language of night, a language people understood only with caution. Its cry was often heard as an omen. Some believed it foretold sorrow, that its voice carried warnings of death or misfortune. Others thought it signaled a change of season or the coming of storms. In the medieval imagination, sound carried weight, and a very call from the forest or field was a message of sorts. The owl's voice, heavy and mournful, seemed too deliberate to be without meaning. Families who lay awake and heard it near their cottage roofs heard prayers, hoping that its message would pass them by. Yet others listened with a quieter reverence, believing the owl spoke not of doom but of hidden wisdom, reminding them that nature itself held mysteries humans could not fully grasp. Owls were creatures of the threshold, belonging neither to day nor to night entirely, but to the shifting hour between. They emerged at dusk, when the last light faded and the first star pricked through the sky, and they vanished again before dawn restored the familiar rhythms of village life. In this liminal time, the owl seemed to live in a world just beyond reach, close enough to see and hear, yet distant enough to remain untouched by human certainty. Medieval people, who lived more closely with the rhythms of nature than we do now, recognized these in-between spaces as powerful. Dusk and dawn, birth and death, silence and sound, all were times and places where the ordinary world grew thin, and the extraordinary felt near. Theo, master of this threshold, carried with it the awe and unease that such spaces inspired. In art and manuscripts, owls sometimes appeared as symbols of wisdom, their wide eyes seeming to reflect careful observation and patience. Scholars who studied by candlelight could see in the owl a likeness of their own work, long hours, silence, and a kind of vision that stretched beyond the ordinary. Yet in the same breath, owls were also painted as symbols of darkness and sorrow, reminders that wisdom often came at the price of solitude. These contradictions mirrored how people experienced the bird in daily life. The owl was never one thing only. It was both respected and feared, cherished and avoided. A reminder that not all creatures could be Isili, Placidento, the simple categories of friend or foe. Picture a medieval farmer walking home late, lantern in hand, Acros fields still damp with evening dew. His steps are slow, the world around him muffled in the darkness. Then from above comes the sudden sweep of wings, soundless yet immense. He glances upward, catching only the pale line of feathers against the moon. The owl glides across his path and settles on the fence post ahead, its eyes fixed on him with an intensity that feels almost human. For a moment, man and bird regard each other, and then, as quickly as it appeared, the owl turns its gaze away, vanishing into the night, as if it had never been there. The farmer walks on, lantern trembling slightly in his grip, unsettled and yet strangely comforted. He has seen something that does not belong to his world, and for that brief moment, he feels the weight of mystery pressing close. In villages, stories of owls often carried warnings. Parents might hush their children indoors after hearing an owl cry nearby, not wishing young ones to stray into the night where spirits might linger. Tales told by the hearth connected the bird's voice with wandering souls, suggesting that owls bore messages between the living and the dead. To explain why the bird seemed always to appear in graveyards or ruined towers, people wove tales of spirits resting in its wings, carried silently across the midnight sky. These stories were not always told with fear, but with solemnity, as though acknowledging that some creatures lived closer to the unknown than humans ever could. At the same time, practical minds respected the owl for what it was, a skilled hunter whose presence meant fewer pests. In barns where grain was stored, an owl was considered a welcome ally, keeping supplies safe without the need for human intervention. A family who glimpsed an owl hunting near their farm might murmur a prayer, half in thanks and half in awe, recognizing the bird's dual role as helper and omen. It was never entirely one or the other, but something balanced between. Monasteries, too, heard the owl's cry. In stone cloisters where monks prayed in the small hours of night, its voice carried through open windows, reminding them that even in silence, the world outside remained alive. To some, it was a symbol of solitude, a reminder that wisdom was often born in darkness and silence. To others, it was a distraction, its mournful, tenepulating thoughts toward mortality. The owl became part of their spiritual reflection, a creature whose presence drew attention to the mysteries of creation itself. Seasons shaped the owl's presence. In winter, when night stretched long, its voice was heard more often, echoing through bare forests and across snow-covered fields. In summer, its hunting aligned with evenings when families sat outside cottages, cooling themselves after hot days, listening to its cry carry from distant hedges. The owl's presence marked time not by hours on a clock, but by sensations: the chill of air, the softness of moonlight, the stillness of fields at midnight. To live with owls was told of with reminders that time was more than daylight. It was the full cycle of dark and light, sound and silence. For children, the owl carried both wonder and dread. To see its round eyes peering from a barn loft could make Occult shrink back in fear. Yet they also whispered stories of the owl as a wise watcher, keeper of secrets hidden from adults. Its cry might frighten them at night, but the sight of its wings unfolding in flight stirred awe too deep for words. In their imaginations, the owl belonged to a world both magical and dangerous, a world that lingered just beyond the reach of firelight. And so, in the medieval imagination, the owl's silence was never empty. It was full of meaning, layered with superstition, practicality, awe, and fear. The bird itself asked nothing of humans, yet it held a mirror to their deepest concerns: survival, mortality, wisdom, and the mysteries of the night. By watching the owl, people were reminded that the world was larger than their cottages and fields. It stretched into forests, into skies, into places where silence itself became a kind of language. Even today, when electric lights banish much of the night's darkness, the cry of an owl can stir the same quiet feelings. It is still a voice of solitude, still a sound that connects us to the deep rhythms of nature. The medieval villager, pausing in his work to listen, and the modern listener, waking briefly at midnight to hear its call, share something across centuries, a recognition that some mysteries are best left as they are heard, felt, and respected, but never fully experienced. The owl's midnight silence, then, is not truly silent at all. It is filled with meaning, with stories whispered across generations, with the weight of time and the depth of night. It reminds us that the world Hazelways contains shadows, and that within those shadows live creatures that teach us to pause, to wonder, and to wax, that not everything can be neatly known. To hear the owl is to stand, however briefly, on the threshold between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between safety and mystery, and in that moment, both medieval villagers and we ourselves feel the same quiet awe of the night. In the quiet imagination of the medieval world, the stag stood apart from other creatures. To many villagers it was not simply an animal of the forest, but a figure of dignity and mystery, appearing in dreams, in carvings, and in whispered stories passed by firelight. The stag, with its tall antlers branching like trees in miniature, seemed to carry with it the deep silence of the woods. When it moved, it did so with a slow, deliberate grace, reminding people that the forest was not only a place of labor and danger, but also of hidden nobility. Few villagers ever saw such an animal up close, for stags kept their distance from human settlements, dwelling in groves and valleys where the trees grew thickest. And yet, even without regular encounters, the presence of the stag lingered in medieval thought, a creature more often imagined than seen, yet never forgotten. To dream of a stag was thought to be significant. In a world where dreams were taken as signs and messages, a vision of such a creature was seen as a promise of guidance or renewal. Its antlers, cast off and regrown with the seasons, became a symbol of resilience, showing that loss could be followed by restoration, and that endings might carry within them the beginnings of new strength. For villagers, whose lives were bound closely to the cycles of harvest and famine, sickness and recovery, this was a powerful symbol. The stag embodied the rhythm of life itself, teaching through its own body what it meant to endure. The antlers themselves fascinated medieval people. They rose like crowns above the stag's head, branching outward in patterns that looked almost deliberate, like the growth of trees shaped by hidden design. Each year, when the stag shed them, it was as though the creature had laid aside one crown to grow another. This natural cycle was not seen as ordinary, but as wondrous, a gift from nature that spoke of purity, renewal, and even holiness. In churches, carvings of stags could sometimes be found, their antlers stretching upward like the arms of worshippers reaching toward heaven. The association was clear. The stag's renewal mirrored the renewal of the soul, reminding those who looked upon it of hope, even in times of weariness. In villages at the edge of great forests, the stag also appeared in tales of hunters. The chase of the stag was not only about food or survival, it carried spiritual meaning. Stories told of hunters who pursued the stag to be led deeper into the woods, where they were shown visions or confronted truths about themselves. The animal seemed to act as a guide, leading humans beyond the ordinary into spaces of revelation. While many villagers would never hunt such a creature, they heard these stories and understood them as parables. The stag was not simply pursued, it was followed towards something greater. In this way, the creature carried both the dignity of the hunt and the sanctity of a teacher. For children gathered by the hearth, listening to tales told builders, the stag became almost mythical. They imagined its shining eyes watching from the forest's edge, its strong body slipping soundlessly between trees, its antlers catching the moonlight like silver. To them, it was a dream animal, belonging partly to the waking world and partly to stories. When they fell asleep and dreamed of such a creature, their parents might reassure them that this was a blessing, a promise that strength or guidance was near. Dreams were taken seriously, and the stag's presence in them was no small matter. Even in monasteries the stag found its place. Monks copying manuscripts sometimes painted small images in the margins, and among these, the stag appeared with quiet regularity. It might be shown drinking from a spring, a symbol of purity, or standing tall with antlers raised, a symbol of resilience. In their cloistered lives, where time was marked by prayer and silence, the stag became a figure of contemplation. Its life in the forest was seen as parallel to the life of the monk set apart. distant from the bustle of towns, seeking nourishment in place unseen. The stag's dignity reminded monks of their own vows of simplicity and devotion, encouraging them to live in tune with cycles of renewal. The seasons shaped how people thought of the stag. In spring, when antlers began to grow again, villagers saw it as a reminder of fresh beginnings, of fields being sown and the promise of harvest. In autumn, when antlers were strongest, the stag embodied fullness and maturity, mirroring the abundance of gathered crops. And in winter, when antlers fell, it carried the weight of loss and quiet endurance, teaching patience until the return of life. These rhythms, which matched the struggles of human communities steed to farming and survival, gave the stag a deep symbolic presence. It was a creature whose body itself carried lessons of time. Some tales told of stags appearing in sacred visions. A traveler lost in the forest might see him standing upon a hill, its antlers glowing in the light of dawn, guiding him toward safety. A hunter might give a gaze and then find himself kneeling in awe as the stag vanished, leaving him with a sense of revelation. These stories, while varied, carried a common thread. The stag was not merely an animal to be captured, but a messenger of sorts, a guide between the seen and the unseen. For villagers, whose nights were filled with the glow of candles and the sound of stories, the stag lived more in imagination than in the woods themselves. Yet this distance made it even more powerful. Its rarity gave it dignity, and its mystery made it a fitting symbol for purity and renewal. To carve a stag into wood or stone, to paint it upon parchment, or to dream of it in sleep, was to bring a piece of the forest's nobility into human life. It was a way of reminding oneself that beyond the fields and cottages lay a world older and larger, where creatures lived by rhythms deeper than human toil. In the calm of night, when villagers drifted into dreams, the stag was there too, a silent figure moving through their minds. Its hooves pressed softly upon the soil of imagination, and its antlers rose like branches in the forests of sleep. To dream of a stag was to feel, if only for a moment, that life itself carried hidden strength, that resilience was always possible, and that guidance might come from the quietest places. In this way, the stag remained not only an animal of the wild, but a companion of human hearts, reminding them of dignity, patience, and the endless cycle of renewal. In the calm rhythm of medieval life, few creatures held such quiet fascination as the bee. Tiny in size yet mighty in number, bees seemed to live with a discipline that inspired both awe and reverence. While the ox pulled Theplo and the rooster called the dawn, bees worked in secret worlds of wax and honey, building hives that shimmered with both sweetness and mystery. Villagers, monks, and even lords looked upon them as more than. They were keepers of order, models of industry, and symbols of a harmony that humans longed to mirror. To step near a hive was to enter a space of hushed respect, where the buzzing carried not only the sound of wings but the hum of something deeper. Life lived in perfect cooperation. Medieval households that kept bees did so with patience. Hives were often simple woven skeps, shaped like domes of straw and resting in quiet corners of gardens or orchards. Villagers approached them slowly, moving with care, as though each step must match the calm rhythm of the bees themselves. It was common to speak softly in their presence, for it was believed that bees disliked loud voices or harsh words. Some even thought that bees could understand human speech, and so they were addressed as neighbors, treated with courtesy as though they belonged to the household itself. Children learned early to respect them, watching from a distance as adults tended the hives with steady hands. The monks of medieval Europe took special interest in bees, seeing in their order a reflection of their own spiritual communities. Just as monks lived together in cloisters, following strict patterns of prayer and labor, bees lived in hives where each had its place and purpose. To a monk, the hive was like a miniature monastery, quiet, orderly, disciplined, and fruitful. Each bee seemed devoted not to itself, but to the whole, laboring for the common good. Sermons and writings compared their tireless work to the ideal Christian life, in which humility, obedience, and diligence brought forth sweetness, like honey flowing from comb. Even the queen bee, who gave life to the hive, was taken as a symbol of leadership and care, guiding her community in silence and constancy. Honey itself was a treasure. In a time before sugar was widely known, it was the sweetest flavor most villagers schooled imagine. To taste honey on the tongue was to experience a richness reserved for festivals, healing tonics, or special meals. Mixed with herbs, it became medicine. Stirred into ale, It became a drink of warmth, spread open bread. It became a treat, remembered by children long into adulthood. Candles of beeswax, smoother and cleaner than those of tallow, filled churches with a golden light and a faint fragrance that lifted the mind toward contemplation. Each of these gifts reminded people of the hive's sacred order, where small, humble labor produced abundance and beauty. Villagers told stories of swarms, those mysterious moments when a cloud of bees rose together into the air, moving as one. To witness it was both frightening and wondrous, as though Theski itself had come alive with humming. Some believed swarms carried messages, signs of fortune or change. If a swarm settled on a branch near a home, it was taken as a blessing, a sign that luck and sweetness would fill. But if a swarm departed entirely, leaving empty skeps behind, it was feared as a loss, a withdrawal of nature's favor. Bees seemed to act according to patterns unseen by humans, and so their movements were read with reverence, as if they carried secrets not meant for ordinary ears. Bees were also bound to rituals. In some places, it was customary to tell the bees of important events in the household, births, marriages, and even it was thought that bees should be kept informed, lest they grow restless or abandon their hives. At funerals, family members might whisper the news of a loved one's passing to the bees, draping the hives with black cloth in mourning. This gentle act revealed how deeply they were woven into human life. They were not just creatures of field and flower, but companions whose harmony echoed in the hearts of those who cared. In the cycle of seasons, bees played their part as surely as the sun and rain. Spring brought blossoms, and with them, the hum of wings as bees visited flowers in orchard and meadow. Summer filled the hives with honey, golden combs growing heavy beneath layers of wax. Autumn was the season of gathering, when keepers took their share of honey with care, always leaving enough for the bees to survive the winter. And winter itself was a time of stillness, when hives seemed quiet, the bees resting in their clusters, waiting for warmth to return. These rhythms mirrored the lives of villagers, who sowed, reaped, and endured according to nature's turning wheel. To stand in a meadow on a summer afternoon, listening to the drone of bees, was to feel the world itself in balance. The sound was steady, never hurried, like the heartbeat of the land. Flowers leaned beneath their weight, releasing fragrance into the air. Sunlight struck the edges of wings, making them glimmer like glass. Children, lying in grass, might watch them move from bloom to bloom, marveling at their diligence. Elders, resting after labor, might close their eyes and find peace in the hum, as though it sang of order in a world often marked by hardship. The bees reminded all who watched that even in smallness there could be greatness, and that harmony was built not in noise but in steady, humble work. In monasteries, beeswax candles became symbols of purity. Their flames burned clean, releasing little smoke, and their honeyed scent filled chapels during night prayers. The light of such candles was said to reflect the soul's devotion, steady and bright against darkness. The very act of lighting them was a reminder of the hive's order, of bees laboring unseen so that worshippers might gather in golden glow. To pray beneath their light was to join, in some small way, the harmony of the hive, letting human devotion blend with the quiet work of creation. The respect given to bees extended to their keepers as well. The village beekeeper was seen as someone with knowledge, both practical and mystical. He or she knew how to calm a swarm, how to gather honey without angering the hive, how to move gently among creatures so small yet so powerful in their collective strength. Children sometimes watched these figures with admiration, seeing in them a kind of quiet authority, as though they shared secrets with the beast. Their skill was not loud or boastful, but careful, rooted in patience, much like the creatures they. Bees also reminded people of fragility. A single sting could be painful, and too many could even bring. This balance of sweetness and sting mirrored the balance of life itself, where joy and hardship often walked side by side. To keep bees was to learn respect, to take honey with gratitude, to move with caution, to accept that nature's gifts came not through force but through harmony. In this way, bees taught patience, reminding villagers that the sweetest rewards came to those who moved gently and waited in season. Legends, too, grew around them. Some tales said that bees were born from the tears of saints, others that they carried bits of paradise within their wings. In their flight, villagers saw patterns too delicate to understand, as though bees followed lines drawn by unseen hands. Their honey was not only food but blessing, a taste of grace flowing from the labor of many into the sweetness of one. Such stories softened the heart, encouraging gratitude for the smallest creatures whose labor shaped the lives of many. As night fell, the hives grew quiet. In villages, the hum of bees was replaced by the creak of shutters and the crackle of hearths. Yet, even in silence, the presence of bees remained, their wax burning in candles, their honey sweetening bread, their example of order and harmony lingering in thought. To fall asleep in such a world was to know that, beyond the walls of timber and thatch, hives waited in the dark, holding within them a sacred order that mirrored the hopes of humankind. The beast reminded medieval people that life was not about noise or haste, but about steady work, quiet cooperation, and the sweetness that came from patience. Their sacred order was not forced but natural, flowing from instinct into harmony. To admire the bees was to admire creation itself, unfolding in patterns of balance, discipline, and gentle reward. And so, in fields, in cloisters, and in dreams, bees remained both humble creatures and silent teachers, their buzzing wings echoing through the centuries with lessons of order, patience, and light. In the heart of the medieval village, where fields stretched toward the forest and cottages leaned close to Oninetha for comfort, there was almost always the presence of a dog, sometimes large and shaggy, sometimes small and nimble. These creatures moved quietly at the edges of human life, yet were bound to it with deep. They were guardians of hearth and field, friends to shepherds and farmers, and companions to nobles and peasants alike. More than any other animal, dogs seemed to weave themselves into human stories, not only through work and companionship, but also through the powerful symbolism of loyalty, trust, and protection. When the sun set and the lanes of the village grew dim, a dog's bark could break the silence. That sound, sharp and insistent, was more than noise, it was reassurance. Families sitting around their fire knew that their loyal guardians stood watch at the gate, alert to strangers, beasts, or unseen dangers. In a world where the night held real risks, wolves in the forest, thieves on the road, spirits imagined in the darks, such a bark was a shield. To live with a dog was to know that someone was always listening, always watching, and always ready to defend. In medieval belief, this loyalty carried a deeper meaning. Dogs were thought to guard not only the home but Alsath's soul. Stories told of dogs that lingered at their master's grave, keeping vigil even after death, as though the bond of trust extended beyond life itself. Artists carved or painted dogs at the feet of nobles, knights, and saints, not as decoration but as a sign of fidelity. A knight lying in stone upon a tomb might have a small dog at his feet, curled in eternal devotion. This image spoke to all who saw it. Just as the dog guarded the knight in life, so it guarded his honor in death. For peasants, dogs were working partners. In the fields, they helped shepherds guide their sharp instincts, blending with the whistles and calls of their masters. By barns, they kept watch against intruders, both human and animal. Near the hearth, they lay stretched upon rushes, ready to rise at the slightest sound. Yet beyond their usefulness, they carried a sense of companionship, rare among animals. Unlike cats, whose independence inspired both admiration and suspicion, dogs seemed to delight in human presence. They sought their masters, wagged tails in greeting, and rested heads upon laps. This affection, so visible and so steady, became a symbol of what people most longed for in one another: loyalty without condition. The bond between dog and human entered stories and songs. Tales told of hounds that followed their masters into battle, refusing to leave their side. Ballads celebrated dogs that found their way home across miles, guided not by roads but by the invisible thread of devotion. In some legends, a dog might even sense treachery, growling at those who wished harm, as if their hearts could detect what human eyes could not. Such tales, whispered by firelight, confirmed what many villagers already believed, that dogs were not merely animals, but companions touched with something noble. In monasteries, where silence often ruled, dogs were less common, yet even there they appeared in writings and imagery. Some monks compared the barking of a faithful dog to the preaching of truth, loud, persistent, and unafraid of darkness. A guard dog at a cloister gate might remind monks of their own duty to guard the soul against temptation. In illuminated manuscripts, small dogs sometimes appeared at the cornice pages, playful and alert, as though even holy texts needed reminders of loyalty. These images softened the solemnity of devotion, reminding readers that God's creatures also bore lessons of fidelity and care. In noble households, dogs held a special place. Hunting was a favored pursuit of lords and knights, and hounds were treasured not only for their skill but for the companionship they offered. A hunting party, with its horns and riders, was incomplete without the eager stride of dogs leaping through the underbrush. These hounds, trained with patience, were often honored with collars bearing their names, as though they were members of the. Yet even beyond the hunt, smaller lapdogs were cherished by noblewomen, resting at their feet or accompanying them in chambers. These little companions, seen in tapestries and portraits, carried their own symbolism, fidelity, comfort, and the quiet loyalty that eased long hours of waiting in castle halls. Superstitions, too, shaped how dogs were viewed. A dog howling at night was sometimes thought to foretell death, its voice breaking the quiet as an omen of sorrow to come. Villagers might hush one another when a dog cried toward the moon, fearing it had seen what human eyes could not. Yet even in this, the dog remained a guardian, warning off mysteries approaching. More often, their presence was taken as protection against spirits and unseen forces, their sharp senses keeping the unseen at bay. In this way, dogs bridged the natural and the supernatural, trusted in both. Daily life with a dog carried small, memorable moments. A farmer might share scraps of bread after a long day's work, watching the wag of a tail and feeling the quiet companionship of gratitude. Children often grew up alongside dogs, learning to walk by clutching their fur, playing in fields under their watchful eyes. Many a child, frightened of the dark, slept easier knowing the family dog rested near the doorway, a silent sentinel against shadows. These moments, humble yet powerful, shaped the way dogs became woven into memory and imagination. Dogs were not without their challenges. Stray dogs roamed villages, scavenging for food, sometimes feared for spreading illness or for their unpredictable tempers. But even then, the figure of Thedig remained ambivalent rather than rejected. A stray could be seen as both nuisance and opportunity, for with patience and care, even the wildest dog could become a trusted companion. In this way, dogs reminded people that loyalty was not given but nurtured, growing stronger with time, kindness, and shared life. The symbolism of dog extended into dreams. To dream of a faithful dog was thought to promise safety and friendship, while to dream of an angry or attacking dog might warn of betrayal. These interpretations reflected the dual nature of Thedig, capable of both fierce defense and fierce aggression, depending on the bond of trust. Villagers believed that their dreams mirrored truths hidden in daily life, and so dogs appeared in the night as guides to the heart's. The relationship between humans and dogs in the medieval world revealed something essential about both. For all the hardships of that era, famine, war, disease, there was a longing for loyalty and companionship it could endure through difficulty. Dogs offered this freely, without question, standing guard not only at gates but at the thresholds of human hope. Their bark in the night, their steady presence at the hearth, and their carved images in stone spoke of a truth felt deeply, that to be loyal was to be noble, whether one wore armor or fur. As evening settled in the medieval village, the role of the dog became most clear. Lanterns flickered, fires dimmed, and shutters closed against the cool air. In those quiet hours, when fears stirred easily in the imagination, the sound of a dog shifting at the gate or padding along the threshold carried a comfort words could not give. Families lay down to rest, knowing that their loyal companion remained awake, watching, guarding, and ready. In their trust of the dog's watchfulness, they found peace. In the broader symbolism of the age, the loyal dog became more than a household guardian. It became a reminder of fidelity in friendships, devotion in faith, and constancy in love. Just as a dog did not abandon its master, so too should people remain true to their vows, their communities, and their beliefs. To carve a dog at the foot of a tomb, to keep one by the hearth, or to dream a phone in the night was to affirm this hope, that loyalty endures, unbroken by distance, hardship, or even death. And so, in the medieval imagination, the loyal dog was not merely an animal of flesh and fur. It was a companion of the soul, a silent guardian of gates, homes, and hearts. Its presence in life was a shield against danger, its memory in death a symbol of constancy. In every bark, in every wag of the tail, and in every silent vigil kept at a threshold, the dog taught a lesson as timeless as the stars above the village, that true loyalty asks for nothing in return, yet gives everything. In the medieval countryside, where meadows rolled gently toward woodlands and fields stretched beneath the ever-changing sky. There lived a creature both familiar and strange, the hare. Slender, quick, and always watchful, the hare seemed to belong as much to the realm of dreams as to the earth beneath its feet. Two villagers who worked the land, it was a fleeting figure seen at dawn or dusk, darting across paths and fields, pausing only long enough for its wide eyes to meet theirs before vanishing into the grasses. Its sudden appearance stirred curiosity, and its disappearance seemed like magic. Of all the animals that moved close to human settlements, the hare carried with it an aura of mystery that lingered in belief, story, and imagination. Their hare's speed was legendary. Children laughed as they tried to chase one, only to watch it bound effortlessly away, its long legs carrying it beyond reach. For farmers, the hare's presence was both welcome and troubling. It fed upon tender shoots in gardens and fields, yet it also seemed like a creature of the seasons, its life woven into the turning of the year. Unlike livestock, which were fenced and managed, hares were wild and free, slipping between human land and nature's domain. This in-between existence gave them a peculiar significance, a reminder that not all life could be tamed. Medieval minds often turned to the skies for meaning, and many saw in the hare a connection to the moon. Its cycles of activity and abundance seemed to follow lunar rhythms, and its swift breeding in spring mirrored the renewal that came with the waxing light. People whispered that hares carried secrets of the moon in their silent leaps, as though their very bodies bore traces of celestial influence. Just as the moon changed shape yet always returned, so too the hare seemed to vanish and reappear, elusive yet dependable in its seasonal rhythms. In springtime, hares were most visible. Fields came alive with growth, and the air carried a sense of renewal. Villagers saw the hare's playful chases across meadows as signs of fertility and abundance, reminders that the earth was waking. Some communities told tales of hares as guides, gentle creatures who led wanderers through woods or across misty fields when the path seemed uncertain. Children especially heard these stories, reassured by the thought that the mysterious animal of the hedgerow might also be friend, appearing in times of need. The hare's reputation was not without shadows. Its nocturnal habits, its sudden stillness, and its watchful eyes gave it an air of secrecy. To some, this suggested knowledge of things. A hare crossing one's path at night could be taken as an omen, though not always a dark one. At times, it was thought to mark a change approaching, a shift in fortune, or the beginning of a journey. Just as the hare washed to hold, so too were the meanings people gave it, flickering between blessing and mystery. Art and manuscripts of the period reflected this fascination. In the margins of illuminated texts, artists sometimes drew hares in playful poses, chasing, tumbling, or carrying hunting horns like mischievous figures from another world. These images soften the solemnity of the written word, reminding readers of the joy and vitality often in churches. Carvings occasionally showed three hares joined in a circle, their ears touching in a pattern both puzzling and elegant. This design, seen across Europe, hinted at deeper symbolism, unity, eternity, and this cycle of life, all embodied by a humble animal that darted through fields outside village walls. For hunters, hares were both prize and challenge. Their speed and agility made them difficult to catch, and their meat was valued. Yet even in the hunt, hares were treated with a sense of reverence. Some traditions held that to kill a hare without proper words of respect invited misfortune, as though the animal carried within it a spark of something greater than flesh. Stories circulated of hunters who mistreated hares and later found themselves plagued by strange dreams or accidents, warnings that the hare was not an ordinary quarry. The hare's association with Reenwall extended into spiritual thought. Monks and scholars sometimes drew parallels between the hare's swift breeding and the abundance of creation, seeing in its life a lesson about the generosity of nature. Others saw its habit of standing still, ears upright and listening, as an image of vigilance and contemplation. In a quiet cloister, such an image was not out of place. The hare became a reminder that even in the hush of prayer, the soul must remain alert to the unseen. Legends layered further meaning onto the creature. In some tales, hares were shapeshifters, humans who took animal form under moonlight. In others, they were messengers, darting between worlds, with secrets carried in silence. While such stories carried hints of fear, they also revealed the deep sense of awe that people felt for the hare's strangeness. It was an animal that seemed ordinary yet never fully known, moving too quickly for certainty, appearing and disappearing like a thought half-remembered. Daily life with hares nearby created its own small rituals. Farmers might leave the first sheaf of grain in the field, a gift for the hare, ensuring fertility for the coming year. Children, spotting a hare in the distance, might whisper a rhyme for luck. Women, observing the hare's cycles, sometimes spoke of it in hushed tones as a creature bound to the rhythms of fertility and birth. Even those who gave little thought to superstition could not ignore the hare's presence, for it threaded itself into the landscape with quiet persistence. The hare's meaning reached across cultures, and medieval people I heard it older stories as well. From ancient myths, they knew of the hare's ties to deities of the moon and spring, echoes of which lingered in folk traditions. In this blending of old and new, the hare became both a symbol of pagan memory and a part of Christian imagination. The hare that darted across a meadow at dawn carried within it the weight of centuries of belief, its presence reminding villagers of how the past lingered in their present. As evening fell in the medieval village, hares sometimes ventured close to the edge of fields, their silhouettes just visible against the fading light. Families, sitting by their hearths, spoke of them in gentle tones, half serious, half wondering. Perhaps the hare was listening, perhaps it knew the secrets of the night. The ideas, not frightening, but rather soothing, a way of acknowledging that the world was richer and deeper than what could be seen. In dreams, hares appeared often. To dream of a hare running freely was thought to promise their vitality and change, while to dream of catching one might suggest a gain that would slip away if not treated with care. Dreams of hares beneath the moon carried special weight, tying the dreamer's fate to cycles beyond human. These interpretations gave shape to the mystery, allowing people to feel that the hare's fleeting presence was not only chance but part of a larger design. Over time, the hare's image softened into comfort as much as it became part of seasonal festivals, part of the rhythm of fields, part of the quiet knowledge passed down from grandparents to children. To watch a hare bound across a meadow in spring was to feel, even if only for that life was renewing itself, that abundance was near, and that the world still held gentle mysteries. And so, in the medieval imagination, the hare was more than an animal. It was a companion of the seasons, a messenger of renewal, a creature that linked earth to sky and day to night. Its mystery did not unsettle so much as remind, softly and steadily, that the world was wider than what lay within the village gate. The hare's silence was its gift, carrying meanings that words could not hold. To glimpse it at the edge of a field was to step with flinto wonder, a reminder that even the smallest creatures carried secrets of life, cycles, and time. As night deepened and villagers drifted toward rest, the hare remained part of their thoughts. Somewhere in the meadow, it moved silently under the moon, ears alert, eyes reflecting faint light. They might not see it, but they knew it was there, watchful, fleeting, mysterious. In their stories and dreams, it lived on, carrying with it the timeless lesson that renewal is always near, just waiting in the grass, ready to leap forward into the dawn. In the quiet stretches of medieval countryside, where hedgerows framed winding paths and fields stretched toward wooded horizons, serpents held a place in the imagination that was both unsettling and profound. Lesser creatures rarely seen yet always present in thought, carried with them a blend of fear, caution, and deep symbolic weight. To see a serpent slither across the edge of a path was to pause, to feel the earth itself stir with mist. It was not an everyday sight, and perhaps that is why the serpent grew into such a powerful figure in story and belief. Its movements were hidden, its body low to the soil, reminding people that much of the world lived unseen, just beneath the surface of ordinary life. For medieval villagers, serpents represented a duality. On one hand, they were feared creatures whose venom or bite could bring suffering, whose sudden appearance startled the senses. Yet on the other, they were respected, even quietly honored. Farmers understood that serpents hunted rodents, keeping grain stores and barns safe from the damage of gnawing teeth. In this sense, the serpent was a hidden guardian of the harvest, an ally against the pests that threatened food and security. That mixture of dread and appreciation shaped how people spoke of serpents. Never entirely friend, never entirely enemy. Brutal ways a reminder of the careful balance between danger and usefulness in the natural world. One of the most striking qualities of serpents, noticed even by the simplest of observers, was their shedding of skin. To find that empty casing of a serpent left along a wall or beneath a hedge was to glimpse a mystery of renewal. Here was proof that life could shed its old form and yet live on, transformed and renewed. To many, this was a quiet lesson carried by the serpent itself, a sign of rebirth that resonated with both spiritual and seasonal rhythms. Just as the earth renewed itself in spring after the cold of winter, so too did the serpent renew itself, carrying in its silent act a message about survival and change. In religious thought, serpents carried more complicated meaning. From ancient traditions and Christian teachings alike, they were often linked with caution, temptation, or the hidden forces of the earth. Yet even within this, there was nuance. Some stories cast serpents as wise beings, keepers of secret knowledge, reminding listeners that wisdom was not always comforting and that truth called sometimes carried danger. Two medieval minds, shaped by both scripture and folklore, the serpent became Apeirodox, a teacher whose lessons were to be approached with care, never taken lightly, but never dismissed. Daily life provided encounters, small but memorable, with these elusive creatures. A farmer turning hay in the field might suddenly startle a serpent, watching it coil and slip away into the grass. Children walking along paths in summer might see one basking in the sun upon a stone, its stillness broken only by the flicker of its tongue where tasting the air. These moments carried weight beyond their simplicity. They reminded people that the earth beneath their feet was alive with more than they could see, and that in every hedge, every stack of wood, mysteries might linger. The serpent's role in stories reflected its in-between nature. Some tales painted it as a danger lurking in fields, a figure to be avoided or respected from afar. Others made it a helper in disguise, a creature who might reveal hidden treasure or guide a lost traveler if treated kindly. Folklore blurred the lines between real animal and symbolic presence, allowing serpents to carry messages that went far beyond their physical form. A serpent crossing a road could be read as an omen, sometimes of caution, sometimes of change, sometimes of good fortune wrapped in secrecy. These interpretations varied, shaped by local tradition and the mood of the storyteller. In manuscripts and art, serpents appeared frequently, winding their way through the margins of pages, carved into the edges of stone, or painted alongside saints and symbols. Their forms curved gracefully, reminding the viewer of cycles, eternity, and the twisting paths of life. In churches, they could appear as warnings, reminders of temptation and sin. Yet in quieter settings, they were drawn with elegance, their bodies curling into patterns that spoke of rhythm and flow. The serpent's very shape became art, a living line echoing the spirals of nature and time. For healers and herbalists, serpents also carried practical significance. Some believed that watching how serpents behaved in fields could reveal where herbs of power grew. Their association with hidden knowledge extended into medicine, where the serpent's image sometimes accompanied idols or remedies. Though feared, they were also teachers, guiding attentive eyes toward cures that might be found in the soil and plants. The wisdom they carried was not easily won, but it was present for those who observed with care. The seasons shaped how often serpents were seen, and this too influenced belief. In the warmth of summer, serpents were more likely to appear, their movements guided by heat and sunlight. In winter, they vanished from sight, hidden beneath the earth, waiting out the cold. This disappearance and return seemed almost magical, another sign of their connection to cycles of renewal. To the medieval imagination, the serpent was not merely an animal that lived in fields, but a creature that understood the rhythms of time itself. Moving with the hidden pulse of the seasons, legends added further depth. In some villages, people spoke of great serpents that lived beneath hills or guarded wells, watching over sources of water with a presence both protective and dangerous. These stories echoed with ancient memories of dragons and mythical beasts, softened through time into tales that blended fear with awe. Even the smallest serpent, glimpsed in grass, seemed to carry within it a shadow of these larger myths, as though every winding body was a fragment of a greater mystery woven through the land. The duality of serpents, both feared and respected, made them powerful symbols in medieval thought. They were reminders that wisdom was not always safe, that knowledge could be as sharp as it was enlightening. To see a serpent was to be reminded of the balance between life and death, between danger and protection, between what is hidden and what is revealed. These lessons, carried quietly in the shape of a creaturate, slipped silently through the grass, lingered in the minds of those who lived close to the earth. As evening fell and the air cooled, serpents retreated into their hidden places, leaving only memory behind. Villagers, sitting by the hearth, might share a tale of serpents seen in the day, their stories shaped by awe as much as by fear. Children listened with wide eyes, imagining the creature's silent glide, its scales catching the light of the sun or the moon. Yet these tales were not meant to terrify. Rather, they reminded listeners of the wonder within the natural world, of the creatures that lived parallel to human life, never fully understood but always present. The serpent's quiet lesson was one of respect for the earth, for the unseen, and for the rhythms of life that moved beneath surface. It taught that renewal was possible, that wisdom might come from unlikely places, and that not all knowledge was meant to be mastered. In its winding form, in its vanishing and return, the serpent carried meanings that reached far beyond its small body. And so, in the medieval imagination, the serpent remained a creature of paradox, feared yet valued, avoided yet honored, unsettling yet deeply instructive. Its presence in fields, in stories, and in symbols offered a reminder that life was woven of contrasts, and that even in fear there could be wisdom. To walk a path and glimpse a serpent slipping into grass was to pause, to breathe, and to remember that the earth itself was alive with secrets, whispering lessons through creatures that carried silence and depth. As night settled and the countryside grew still, the serpent's movements continued unseen. Beneath edges, under stones, within the cool earth, it rested, waiting for the warmth of another day. For those drifting Jinto's sleep, thoughts of serpents lingered, not as terror, but as quiet reflection symbols of change, protectors of grain, carriers of wisdom older than memory. In their mystery, they invited people to see the world with humility, to acknowledge that not all things could be controlled, and that sometimes the deepest truths came from creatures who lived close to the ground, moving softly, carrying the timeless rhythm of renewal. In the heart of the medieval countryside, where fields stretched in soft rolling patterns and mornings began, with mist clanging low to the earth, cows were steady companions to human life. Their presence was constant, their movements slow and rhythmic, and their importance undeniable. To live in a village without cows was almost unthinkable, for they were not merely animals in a field, they were partners in survival, sources of nourishment, and quiet reminders of peace. Their broad shapes grazing against the horizon became part of the very landscape, symbols of both plenty and the dependable rhythm of the passing days. Every household that could afford to keep a cow did so, for to have even one meant security. Milk-filled pitchers at dawn, providing not only drink but base for butter and cheese, staples that carried families through leaner seasons. The steady yield of milk was a gift that renewed itself daily, a kind of quiet miracle woven into ordinary life. Women rose before sunrise to milk them, the sound of the stream hitting wooden pails mingling with birdsong in the cool of morning. That soft, familiar sound was one of comfort, promising nourishment for the day ahead. Beyond sustenance, cows were companions in the rhythm of labor. Their strength was often called upon to pull carts or plow smaller plots of land. Their steady pace, a balance to the urgency of human hands. Unlike horses, whose speed was valued in travel or war, cows offered a different kind of gift, endurance. Their slow, patient steps across furrows mirrored the patience required to cultivate crops, reminding villagers that life unfolded not in haste, but through their presence also carried emotional weight. To hear a cow's low call drifting across a misty field at dawn was to feel a sense of reassurance. It was a sound that meant the world was as it should be, that the animals were well, that the morning was beginning, that the cycle of work and nourishment would continue. Their chewing in the meadow, a slow grinding rhythm, became part of the background music of rural life, blending with the rustle of wind in grass and the trickle of streams. In their calm, people found calmness. It is little wonder, then, that beliefs and symbols grew around these gentle animals. Cows became emblems of abundance, tied to fertility and prosperity. Their ability to produce milk, seemingly without end, was likened to the generosity of the earth itself. In tales passed down among villagers, a cow that wandered into one's sire was considered a blessing, an omen of good fortune and coming plenty. To mistreat a cow, by contrast, was said to bring misfortune, as though the spirit of the earth took offense at ingratitude towards so sacred a gift. In many ways, cows bridged the natural and spiritual. Monks, observing their quiet nature, sometimes compared cows to faithful souls, unhurried, steady, devoted to their purpose without complaint. Their wide eyes, dark and reflective, seemed to carry an ancient gentleness, a kind of patience that invited humans to slow down and match their rhythm. For children growing up in villages, cows were often the first animals they were allowed to approach, their docile temperaments making them less frightening than horses or geese. Stroking the warm flank of a cow or feeling the tickle of its breath was an experience that bound generations to these creatures in affection as much as independence. The connection deepened during festivals and seasons of gratitude. In harvest celebrations, cows were sometimes adorned with garlands of flowers or touched with water blessed by priests, symbolic acts acknowledging their central role in the community's well-being. Farmers understood that their labor was shared with these animals, and so a gesture of honor seemed only natural. Songs and prayers occasionally mentioned cows alongside fields of grain, as though the two were inseparable parts of the samaprimise of life. Folklore often wove cows into stories of wonder. There were tales of magical cows that never ceased, giving milk, whose abundance could sustain whole villages in times of famine. Other stories spoke of cows, leading lost wanderers back to safety, their steady lowing guiding travelers through mist or forest. In Thestles, cows became more than animals. They became symbols of guidance, of quiet faithfulness, of sustenance that endured through hardship. Such stories reflected what villagers already felt, that these creatures were not only useful but deeply meaningful, carrying within them a spirit of generosity that mirrored the hopes of their people. Practical life reinforced the symbolism. Butter churned from cow's milk was not only a food, but a source of trade, exchanged in markets or offered as gifts. Cheese, carefully prepared and aged, became a means of preserving nourishment across seasons, tying survival to the milk of cows. Each product was a reminder that what began in the pasture could extend into the very heart of daily living. The village's health, both physical and economic, was tied to the slow chewing of cows in the meadow. Seasons shaped the relationship with feed. In summer, cows grazed freely, their bells tinkling softly as they wandered meadows, their shadow stretched long in the evening sun, a picture of calmness as they stood in shallow streams to cool themselves. In winter, when fields grew barren, the care of cows became more demanding. Farmers stored hay carefully, knowing that the health of their animals meant survival for the family. Watching a cow weather the harsh cold, its breath steaming in the frosty air, was a reminder of resilience, a shared struggle against the season's severity. Spiritual symbolism deepened further in Christian contexts. The Nativity story itself placed cows near the Holy Child, their breath warming the stable, their presence grounding a divine event in the reality of ordinary rural life. For medieval villagers, this image reinforced the holiness of their animals, suggesting that even the humble creature might stand close to the most sacred of mysteries. To look upon a cow in the pasture, then, was not unlike to see sustenance, but to glimpse a reflection of divine order, where gentleness and provision were honored. Children, too, built their own quiet relationship with cows. Many were tasked with leading them to pasture, or watching over them at the field's edge. These hours fostered familiarity, even friendship. Stories tell of children sing to cows, whispering secrets into their ears, or finding comfort in leaning against their warm sides. These simple acts reveal how cows were woven into emotional as well as practical life, steadfast presences in a world often marked by hardship and uncertainty. Travelers often remarked on the sight of cows scattered across the... To pass through a village where cows grazed peacefully was to sense the pulse of daily life. They were markers of stability, of settled communities that worked the land and found their rhythm in partnership with animals. Even in distant monasteries, where monks sought solitude and silence, cows were kept, their lowing echoing softly in cloisters, tying spiritual life to practical necessity. The symbolic richness of cows extended to dream of a cow was said to foretell prosperity or the coming of new life. Dreams of many cows together suggested a season of plenty, while a lone cow might be a reminder of patience and endurance. These interpretations, passed along quietly by midwives or elders, reflected the way cows embodied the hopes and fears of human survival. Even death carried meaning. When a beloved cow passed, some villagers mourned deeply, not only for the loss of milk, but for the loss of a companion. Stories were told of cows that lingered in Mori long after their time, remembered for their gentle eyes, or their faithful return to the same pasture. The grief was practical, but it was also personal, showing how deeply humans had bound their lives with those of their animals. In the great arc of medieval imagination, the cow came to represent more than any. It was sustenance, labor, companionship, and symbol all at once. It was fertility in abundance, gentleness and patience, a creature that mirrored the steady unfolding of time itself. To stand in a meadow and watch cows graze was to see life in its simplest, most enduring form, peaceful, nourishing, and quietly profound. As twilight fell and villagers returned from fields, the cows gathered together, their shapes dark against their fitting sky. Bells chimed faintly, their tones softening with distance, and the animals lay down to rest, chewing slow as stars emerged. For the people who watched them, there was reassurance in this sight. No matter the struggles of the day, no matter the uncertainties of tomorrow, the cows remained steady presences whose lives strode the rhythm of the earth. And so, in the medieval world, cows were more than creatures in the pasture. They were part of the soul of the village, woven into its daily breath and its spiritual imagination. Their lowing at dawn, their chewing in the field, their patience under the yoke, these were lessons and comforts to those who lived beside them. In their presence, people found both sustenance and a mirror of the values they cherished: endurance, abundance, and the quiet peace of ordinary life. As day drifted toward its close in the medieval countryside, the world softened into a gentler rhythm. Fields that had been alive with the sound of horses' carts and voices fell quiet, their energy fading with the sinking of the smoke rose slowly from thatched chimneys, curling into the cool air and carrying with it the scent of wood, peat, or straw. The river glistened faintly, reflecting the last touches of light. And then, as if on cue, a sound carried through the hedgerows and across the meadows, the song of the blackbird. The blackbird was not a rare sight in villages or along the edges of fields. Its sleek dark feathers blended with the shadows of dusk, while its bright beak caught the fading light. What made it remarkable was not its appearance, but its voice. The song was rich, flowing, and full, beginning with a few clear notes and spilling into a melody that seemed to belong more to a dream than to the waking world. In medieval times, this evening song carried meaning that went beyond beauty. It was thought to mark a threshold, a quiet reminder that night was not to be feared, but embraced. The blackbird's voice was the herald of rest, the gentle keeper of twilight. Villagers, weary from the day's work, often paused when they heard it. A farmer might rest his hand upon the handle of his hoe, listening as the bird sang from a hedgerow nearby. Children fetching water from the well might turn their heads and smile at the sound, feeling as though it was meant just for them. Women stirring pots over hearths, hearing the notes drift in through open shutters, sometimes hummed along, letting the melody fold into the rhythm of their evening tasks. The blackbird was part of the soundtrack of village life, its music binding together work, rest, and the slow cycle of days. In belief and imagination, the blackbird carried quiet symbolism. Its song was thought to calm the spirits of the night, warding off the unease that darkness often brought. Medieval life was shadowed by uncertainty as the sun went down. The fear of thieves, the presence of wolves at the edge of fields, the thought of unseen spirits moving through the night. Against this background, the blackbird's song was reassurance. Its note seemed to weave a shield of calm, protecting hearths and hearts until morning returned. Some even believed the blackbird's evening tune carried prayers into the sky, like music offered on behalf of the village. The sound seemed deliberate, almost sacred, as if the bird had been placed at the edge of night to guide people into sleep with a song instead of silence. Stories were told of blackbirds appearing at times of sorrow, their music offering comfort to the grieving, or signaling that peace was near after a period of hardship. To hear a blackbird sing at twilight was to be reminded that endings were gentle, not harsh, that darkness, too, could carry beauty. In daily life, the bird's presence was tied to the shape of the land. Blackbirds nested in hedges, bushes, and the corners of gardens, always near people but never intrusive. Their habit of singing from a perch near houses made them familiar companions at the close of day. They were creatures of thresholds, perching at the edge of fields, at Thebodor, between home and wild, between light and shadow. Villagers came to see them as symbolic of these in-between places, guardians of moments that were neither one thing nor the other. The emotional bond was strong because of timing. Morning was filled with the crow of roosters, loud and certain, marking the triumph of day. But the evening was different. The blackbird's song was not commanding or urgent. It was gentle, flowing, filled with pauses that seemed to leave room for thought. Its music blended with the sound of footsteps on dirt paths as families returned home, with the soft bleating of sheep being gathered into pens, and with the hush that always came before the first stars appeared. In this way, the blackbird was not just a bird, it was part of the rhythm of rest. Children were often told simple tales about the bird. In some, the blackbird was said to carry dreams upon its wings, choosing which household to visit with soft visions of safety and joy. In others, its song was said to call the angels who walked the earth at night, guiding them toward the village so that no harm would come. Such tales were not grand legends but whispers, woven into bedtime moments, helping children feel that the darkness outside their shutters was gentle, not frightening. The blackbird's association with music gave it a special place in medieval imagination. Minstrels sometimes compared their own playing to the song of the blackbird, noting how its tune rose and fell with elegance. A lute in the evening might echo the bird's melody, a way of imitating nature's music in human form. In some manuscripts, birdsong was described in poetic terms, and the blackbird, with its steady evening voice, was praised as one of the sweetest singers of the land. Its symbolism also just as the rooster marked beginnings, the blackbird marked endings. Its message was that closure could be soft, that the day's labor could give way to rest without fear. Villagers often lived with uncertainty of harvest, of weather, of illness, and so they cherished small assurances wherever they could be found. The blackbird became one of these. Its predictable evening music was a constant reminder that even in a world filled with hardships, beauty arrived faithfully at the close of every day. There were also moments of superstition. Some whispered that if a blackbird sang unusually late into the night, it was a sign of change, a message that something in the village would shift. While such omens were taken seriously, they were never fearful in the way that the cry of an owl might be. Instead, the blackbird's message was thought to be gentler, tied to transformation rather than warning. A family might hear its song at an odd hour and wonder if a birth, a marriage, or some other quiet milestone was near. Seasons shaped the way people experienced the bird. In spring, when evenings were longer and filled with blossoming scents, the blackbird's voice was particularly joyful, blending with the fragrance of hawthorn and the golden light of late sunsets. In winter, when nights arrived quickly and cold air pressed close, its song was briefer, softer, as though it, too, respected the stillness of the season. These variations only deepened the sense that the blackbird was in tune with the rhythms of the world, adjusting its music to match the needs of time and place. For those who worked the land, the blackbird's evening song was a clock off. Before mechanical timepieces were common, people judged the passing of hours by the sun, the sound of bells, and the behavior of animals. The blackbird's tune told them that the last tasks of the day should be finished, that it was time to gather tools, to close gates, to draw shutters. Its song marked a natural transition, Araminda, that rest was part of the order of life. Even monasteries, set apart from villages yet bound by nature's rhythm, felt the presence of the blackbird. As monks recited evening prayers in candlelit chapels, the faint notes of birdsong sometimes drifted through open cloisters. The harmony between human voices in chant and the bird's solitary song was noted by some as a reflection of divine order, nature and devotion blending together in the same twilight. In this way, the blackbird became a quiet companion to spiritual life. A voice outside the walls that echoed the peace sought within. Dreams too were shaped by the bird's symbolism. To dream of a blackbird sing at dusk was thought to promise peace after struggle, or calm after conflict. If someone dreamed of a blackbird perched silently, it might mean that rest was needed, that the soul itself longed for a pause. Such interpretations were not official teachings, but a kind of soft wisdom carried through generations, whispered between neighbors or shared by mothers to children. Over time, these beliefs layered upon each other, creating a portrait of the blackbird as more than a creature of feather and beak. It was a keeper of thresholds, a herald of peace, a singer of endings. It symbolized the value of stillness, the gift of beauty that asked for nothing in return. To the medieval imagination, it was proof that even in ordinary hedgerows, extraordinary meaning could be found. As night settled fully, the blackbird fell silent. Its song was not endless, and that, too, was part of its silence after song made the music more precious, teaching people to cherish the fleeting beauty of each evening. Villagers lay down upon straw beds, listening as quiet replaced melody, their hearts eased by the memory of the notes that had drifted through the twilight. In that silence, the blackbird's presence lingered, as if its music had woven itself into the very air of the night. So the cycle repeated, night after night, season after season. Generations came and went, yet the blackbird remained a faithful companion of twilight, a voice that bridged day and night, work and rest, fear and peace. Its evening song, soft yet carrying, was part of the medieval world's heartbeat, an ordinary miracle that made endings feel safe. To listen to it was to feel cradled by time itself, reassured that after labor comes calm, and after every setting sun, there is beauty in the waiting dark. As spring returned to the medieval countryside, the first signs of warmth and growth came not only in the greening of fields or the lengthening of days, but in the sound of lambs, their voices carried across meadow sand hillsides, soft bleats that rose like gentle music above the quiet rhythm of village life. To hear them was to feel reassured that the long, cold season had truly ended, and that life was unfolding again in its steady, dependable way. The lamb was not just an animal, it was a symbol, woven deeply into the fabric of belief, daily routine, and imagination. In medieval thought, the lamb carried layers of meaning. It was valued for its wool, fourth meat it provided, and for its role in sustaining households and markets. But beyond its material worth, the lamb became an image of innocence, renewal, and sacrifice. When families looked at the tender creature following close at its mother's side, they saw more than livestock. They saw reassurance, the promise that nature's cycle continued, that the world had not stopped turning through the hardest of winters, and that the community was again blessed with abundance. The sight of lambs scattered across green fields was deeply Tito spring. In February and March, when frosts still lingered in shaded corners, villagers began to notice Thebe. By April, the meadows rang with their voices, high-pitched and almost playful, a chorus that blended with birdsong and the hum of awakening insects. Children especially delighted in them, chasing after the young animals, laughing as the lambs bounded clumsily away on wobbly legs. Mothers, watching their children and the sheep alike, took comfort in the mirrored scenes of life renewing itself. Practical life was shaped by the lambs. Their wool, once grown, provided spinning material for yarn, which in turn made garments, blankets, and other essentials. A household that owned sheep could clothe itself, barter surplus wool, or sell it in local markets. The lamb was therefore not just a creature of beauty, but an assurance of survival. Each small, fragile body represented a future of warmth and trade. Yet medieval people rarely separated the practical from the symbolic. The usefulness of the lamb deepened, rather than lessened, its role as a cherished image of innocent purity. In art, the lamb appeared often, painted upon church walls or carved into stone. It was a reminder of spiritual truths. For Christians, it symbolized Christ, meek and sacrificial, carrying associations of redemption. Monks writing manuscripts often illuminated margins with lambs, drawing links between the quiet life of the animal and the desired humility of the faithful. Villagers who saw these images during services in chapels or parish churches would have carried them home in memory, linking the sight of real lambs in fields with the stories and prayers they heard at worship. Thus, the ordinary and the sacred overlapped. The lamb bleating in pasture was also the lamb in story, carrying meaning beyond itself. Even in folk tradition, outside thralls of the church, the lamb was surrounded by quiet reverence. People believed that the first cry of a lamb in spring could bring luck, especially if it was heard while facing east, toward the sunrise. Others said that a lamb bleating peacefully on its side was a sign of fair weather to come. These small beliefs tied the rhythms of farming tumans of hope, softening the uncertainties of rural life with signs of comfort. The bond between shepherds and lambs was especially strong. To guide and protect them was both duty and care. Shepherds often worked alone in hillsides, their days shaped by weather, grazing patterns, and the behavior of the flock. A shepherd cradling a newborn lamb, warming it against the chill air, embodied one of the most tender scenes of medieval life. Such images became metaphors in both religious and secular thought. The shepherd's care for the lamb became a symbol of guidance, guardianship, and gentle authority. Villagers, watching from a distance, felt reassured that life itself was being carefully watched over. Evenings in the countryside often carried the sound of lambs calling for their mothers. Families sitting at supper, with windows open in warmer months, would hear the faint bleating drifting in. It was a familiar background sound, as natural as the crackle of the hearth. In this way, lambs became part of the sensory fabric of daily life. Their presence was not dramatic, but constant, weaving a gentle layer of freshness into the passing hours. For children, lambs held a special fascination. They were small enough to approach, gentle enough to touch, and playful in ways that mirrored the energy of youth. Many childhood mores in the medieval village were tied to them, chasing lambs through fields, hearing their voices at night, or watching as mothers spun wool from the fleeces that had grown. These early encounters shaped how generations thought of the animal, not as distant livestock, but as companions in the rhythm of springtime. Stories about lambs circulated quietly in villages. Some told of lambs leading lost travelers safely home, their voices carrying like beacons in the dark. Others spoke of lambs appearing in dreams as signs of coming fortune, a spiritual blessing. These stories were not grand myths but gentle tales, passed around hearths in the evening, shaped to comfort children or to remind adults of the closeness of the divine in everyday life. The lamb, always soft and innocent, was never a creature of threat or fear. Instead, it stood for everything gentle in the world: new beginnings, unspoiled life, the possibility of renewal. Markets brought another layer of experience. In spring, Anzuma towns filled with the sounds of bleating as lambs and sheep were sold. For villagers, these gatherings were not only economic, but social. The presence of lambs reminded everyone of abundance, of the continuing cycle that tied village to countryside. Buyers stroked the animals, judged their size, and listened to their calls, all while chatting with neighbors and sharing news. To walk through a market where lambs were sold was to experience a mingling of life's necessities and its simple joys. Seasonal rhythms deepened the connection. Each year brought lambs, and each year they became markers of time. Children grew up counting springs, not only by flowers or birds, but by the arrival of lambs in the fields. Adults marked the end of winters not by dates on calendars, but by the first bleating that drifted through the misty air. These rhythms gave structure to life, offering continuity across generations. Even as hardship came, bad harvests, illness, storms, the lamb returned each spring, carrying with it a reminder of resilience. At night, when darkness fell across the countryside, the sound of lambs quieted. Villagers, lying down upon straw beds, sometimes thought of the lamb as an image of safety. Just as the lamb lay close to its mother for protection, so too did families huddle together against the cold, Junknown, and the long hours of the night. This parallel deepened the emotional bond. The lamb was not distant, but familiar, reflecting human feelings in its simple presence. The symbolism of innocence made the lamb a subject of songs and poems. Simple verses, sung in cottages or fields, often described lambs frolicking in meadows, their whiteness shining against the green. Such songs were not written for entertainment alone, but as reminders of purity, of unspoiled joy, of the fleeting beauty of youth. To sing of lambs was to hold on to the tender side of life, even in times when harshness pressed close. In monasteries too, lambs held special meaning. Monks compared their quiet obedience to the virtues of humility and discipline. The lamb's willingness to follow its shepherd mirrored the life of the faithful, who sought to follow spiritual guidance. In liturgy and prayer, references to the lamb abounded, and for villagers who heard them, the words resonated with what they saw each day in the fields outside the church walls. Dreams of lambs were often remembered with care. A villagero dreamed of a lamb might wake feeling comforted, believing it a sign of gentle fortune to come. Others took it as a message that renewal was near, that hardships would pass. Dream interpretation was part of medieval life, and the lamb always carried positive meaning. Unlike other animals whose appearances could be warnings, the gentle presence of lambs wove itself into memory. A child grown old could recall the sound of spring bleating from decades before, the way it had carried through the cool evening air. A woman might remember spinning wool by firelight, the fleece of a lamb she had known as a child transformed into warmth. For her own children, these memories stretched across lifetimes, making the lamb not only a creature of the present, but a bridge across generations. As centuries passed, the role of lambs in medieval life remained steady. They were symbols in art, companions in fields, and providers in households. Their innocence carried weight in both belief and feeling, reminding communities that gentleness had a place even in a world of toil. To hear their voices was to know that life continued, unbroken, steady as the cycle of seasons. When twilight settled over the fields, lambs drew close to their mothers, curling into the grass for warmth. Villagers, too, gathered close in cottages, listening to the quiet of the evening. In those moments, human life and animal life seemed to mirror one another, both seeking comfort, both held by the same rhythms of nature, both resting in the same unfolding of time. Suthlam endured in memory and in meaning, not just an animal of flesh and wool, but a creature that taught lessons of renewal, innocence, and gentle continuity. Its voice in the distance was a reminder of calm. Its presence in fields was a promise of abundance. Its image in art was a sign of purity. The lamb was, above all, a companion in the quiet journey of medieval life, a symbol of how even the softest and most fragile creature carries strength, beauty, and hope. In the medieval world, where rivers curved quietly through valleys and ponds mirrored the sky, the fish lived ancient lives, moving silently beneath the surface of waters that shaped both daily survival and spiritual thought. Two villagers. Fish were creatures of patience and mystery, appearing briefly when caught, but otherwise dwelling in hidden realms where human eyes could not follow. Their silence was striking. Unlike cattle with their low calls, or birds filling the sky with song, or dogs whose barks guarded cottages, the fish gave no voice. Instead, they moved steadily, calm and deliberate, slipping between reeds and stones as if carrying secrets of another world. Medieval people, surrounded by creatures that spoke, cried, or sang, noticed this difference and gave it. The fish's quiet became a metaphor, a reminder of endurance, contemplation, and the unspoken truths that ran deep beneath the surface of ordinary life. Villagers walking along riverbanks often paused to watch ripples where fish stirred the water, and in those small circles they found not only the promise of food, but the sense of a mystery that could not be fully grasped. Markets were filled with their presence, piles of shimmering scales catching the light, eels coiling slowly in baskets, salted herrings stacked in rosebud. Even in this, the thought of their hidden existence remained. Fish were tied to fasting and spiritual discipline. On days when meat was forbidden, the faithful turned to the river's gift, seeing in its silence a reflection of their restraint asked of them. A meal of fish was not only nourishment but a symbolic act, a reminder that patience and control were virtues worth practicing. In monasteries, ponds were carefully maintained, filled with carp and trout, tended by monks who knew that these creatures served both body and spirit. Watching them swim in slow, deliberate patterns was considered a lesson in composure, a vision of life lived without noise, without haste, steady and enduring. For peasants, the riverbank was a place of gathering. Men cast nets while children peered into the shallows, hoping to glimpse a darting flash of silver. Women carried baskets of fish home, their smell mingling with herbs and smoke as they prepared simple meals. These moments, woven into daily routine, shepherded fish were remembered, not only as sustenance, but as part of the greater rhythm of patience and waiting. Two fish was often to sit quietly, watching ripples, listening to water, learning to wait without frustration. Patience became a virtue drawn directly from the water's creatures, for only the still watcher would see the right memento strike, and only the persistent hand would return home with food. In stories, fish were tied to hidden worlds. Tales whispered of enormous creatures deep in lakes, their size beyond comprehension, guardians of treasure, or secrets long forgotten. Even small fish suggested this mystery. Their silence left space for imagination, and their unseen depths encouraged thoughts of other realms beneath the surface. Dreams of fish were taken seriously, thought to hint at fortune or hidden knowledge. A villager who dreamed of catching a great fish might wake with hope for success, while one who saw fish swimming away could take it as a warning of opportunity slipping past. This symbolic weight made the fish far more than common food. It became a carrier of meaning, a bridge between ordinary life and deeper truths. Markets bustled with their trade, yet even there, amid noise and bargaining, the quiet nature of the creatures was remembered. Their bodies glittering with scales, were reminders of the silent rivers, the still ponds, the patient waiting of nets cast into water. Salted fish carried acris regens became a thread connecting one village to another, one season to the next, sustaining households through winters when fresh food was scarce. In art, fish sometimes appeared in sacred scenes, linked to miracles, faith, and the feeding of the hungry. A painted fish upon a wall or a carved fish in stone reminded onlookers that abundance could be born from patience. That silence could carry profound meaning. Children, staring into shallow pools, often marveled at the way fish slipped just out of reach, their movements smooth, gliding, almost. To chase them was to learn humility, for no matter how quickly a hand struck the water, the fisherfan escaped, leaving only ripples behind. Adults saw in this elusiveness a quiet lesson that not everything could be grasped, that some truths, like some creatures, lived beyond the reach of human certainty. Yet even so, the fish continued to give. Their flesh-fed families, their presence reminded communities of Riversworth, and their symbolism deepened thought. The silence of the fish was not emptiness, it was fullness of another kind, a steady presence that whispered without sound. In evenings, when villagers sat by hearths, fish often formed part of the meal, their taste mingled with bread and ale, their quiet presence at the table reminding all of the river that flowed just beyond the fields. Some said that to eat fish during fasts was to take in patience itself, to make part of oneself the quiet endurance of the creature. For monks chanting in cloisters, fish in ponds nearby were symbols of contemplation, their movements slow and thoughtful, echoing the rhythm of prayer. For peasants laboring in fields, fish in streams were reminders that reward came to those who waited, who worked steadily, who lived without haste. And for children, fish were simply wonders, flickering lights beneath the surface of a hidden world, silent companions to games played at the water's edge. In all these ways, the fish endured not only as food but as symbol, its silence speaking more deeply than the loudest voice. Its patience shaped belief, its mystery stirred imagination, and its endurance gave comfort. In the medieval village, where life was shaped by rhythm, season, and faith, the fish swam quietly beneath, a creature of silence carrying meaning far beyond its simple form. In the quiet air of medieval mornings, when mist still hung low above fields and the first bells of chapels began to ring, the dove often appeared as a gentle companion to both countryside and town. Its wings carried softly through the air, never harsh, but gliding with a kind of tender patience. Villagers noticed how doves circled rooftops cooing in pairs, their sound like a low lullaby against the stirrings of daily life. Where the rooster's crow carried energy and command, the dove's voice was mild and unhurried, a rhythm that seemed to soften the edges of human labor. Children, stretching in doorways, learned to take comfort from its presence. For, if the dove cooed, the day seemed promising, safe, and marked by calm. Unlike birds of prey whose cries pierced deskies, the dove seemed to embody gentleness itself, living quietly alongside people without demanding fear. In chapels, carved stone doves appeared above altars or upon holy books, their imagery tied to blessing, purity and peace. To glimpse a real dove upon the windowsill of such a building felt too many like a reassurance that Thesika touched everyday life. The medieval imagination gave deep meaning to the dove, seeing it as a messenger of kindness in a world where hardship was common. Where lambs symbolized innocence in fields, doves carried that same quality into the sky, showing tenderness through their flight. Many villagers believed that when doves nested in a barn's rafters, prosperity and blessing were close at hand. Farmers treated them with a quiet respect, rarely disturbing their nests. A feather drifting down into the courtyard might be picked up by a child and treasured, a soft keepsake believed to carry luck or divine favor. When a dove chose to alight upon a fence post or rooftop, it was taken as a sign of harmony, as though the bird itself bestowed balance on the home it visited. In a time when storms, famine, and uncertainty were constant companions, such signs carried weight. They were not dismissed as mere coincidence, but folded into the daily rhythm of belief, reinforcing the hope that the world still held gentleness. Meals, markets, and gatherings sometimes brought doves into closer contact. Pigeons and doves were kept in dovecotes, tall stone towers filled with ledges where birds could nest. These structures dotted villages and estates, their round walls standing like watchtowers of peace. For peasants, doves provided eggs and meat on rare occasions, but more often their presence was symbolic, tied to abundance and well-being. To see the sky darken briefly with their collective flight was to feel surrounded by order and blessing, as though the air itself carried a message of calm. Monks, copying manuscripts in dimly lit scriptoria, sometimes drew doves in the margins, adding them not as decoration alone but as quiet reminders of spiritual truth. Their white feathers beck visual metaphors for the soul unburdened, rising toward purity. Stories told by hearthfires often gave doves special roles. Some tales described how doves carried messages between lovers, bridging distance with their tireless flight. Others spoke of doves landing upon the shoulders of saints or circling above sacred springs, marking holy ground. Parents whispered to children that the presence of a dove at a wedding foretold harmony in marriage, while to see two doves perched together was a blessing for affection and unity. These tales were not told with excitement or drama, but with a calm reverence, carried across generations as part of the soft fabric of belief that wrapped ordinary lives. In a world where quarrels and hardship could press heavily, the dove became a gentle reminder that harmony was possible, that tenderness still had a place. Daily life was not always gentle, yet the dove seemed to bring softness into even the busiest settings. In bustling towns, where market cries, wagon wheels, and blacksmith hammers filled the air, the coo of doves on rooftops gave contrast, a quieter layer to the day's soundscape. Merchants setting out wares noticed them, and children weaving between stalsoma times looked up to catch sight of wings fluttering overhead. The birds seemed untouched by the noise, continuing their rhythms regardless of human commotion, and in this calm endurance, people found a lesson. If dove could remain unshaken by the noise of the world, perhaps so could they, moving gently within their clamor of necessity. Spiritual associations deepened the dove's meaning. In sermons, priests spoke of the dove as a bearer of divine blessing, linking it to stories of hope and peace. For the faithful, to imagine a dove descending was to imagine calm after struggle, grace after hardship. In artwork, doves often appeared above sacred figures, glowing with a halo of meaning that villagers understood even without words. They were part of the shared symbolic language that made sense of life's events. Just as fish in rivers taught patience, and lambs in meadows reflected innocence, the dove reminded all who saw it of harmony, reminding them to carry tenderness into their homes and fields. At weddings, some communities released doves as tokens of good fortune, watching them circle into the sky before disappearing beyond rooftops. The moment carried both beauty and reassurance, as though the couple's future had been entrusted to the wings of gentle creatures. At funerals, two doves summertime appeared, their presence linked to the soul's peaceful departure. Villagers who noticed one circling overhead during a burial whispered softly, believing it to be a sign of blessing. Even if coincidence, the moment soothed grieving hearts, turning sorrow into a sense of quiet continuity. Children often grew attached to doves, watching them in courtyards or scattering seed to attract them closer. Their soft cooing lulled infants to rest in cradles near open windows, while older children delighted in seeing them bathe in puddles after rain. In these ordinariness, the dove's role as a creature of calm was reinforced. Unlike dogs, who barked, or cats, who stalked silently with bright eyes, the dove carried no tension, no threat. Its very nature seemed to reassure, embodying the quiet rhythm of life that medieval people cherished amid uncertainty. Seasons too were marked by their in spring, when fields turned green again and flowers returned, doves were among the birds that reminded people of renewal. Their gentle calls blended with the hum of bees and the laughter of children, forming part of the soundscape of warmth and growth. In winter, when snow silenced much of the land, doves still gathered in dovecotes, their forms a reminder that life endured, waiting patiently for the return of summer. To see their tracks in snow outside chapels was to remember that tenderness remained even in harsh times, leaving quiet marks upon the frozen ground. Dreams of doves held their own meanings. To dream of a dove entering one's house was taken as a sign of coming peace or reconciliation. To dream of two doves together suggested harmony in relationships. These interpretations were shared around hearths, part of the symbolic lang villagers used to make sense of their inner worlds. In a life shaped by toil, hunger, and uncertainty, the idea that such dreams could carry gentle promises gave comfort. Even in sleep, the dove remained close, shaping the way people thought about their future. Travelers across regions often noted how widespread the reverence for doves had become, whether in bustling towns, remote villages, or monastic estates. These birds were treated with respect, admired for their gentleness, and woven into the spiritual fabric of communities. Their universality was part of their power. Unlike rare creatures, glimpsed only occasionally in forests or mountains, doves were common enough to be familiar, yet still carried symbolic weight. They connected people across boundaries, offering a shared reminder that harmony and blessing were possible, whether one lived in a cottage of timber or within the walls of a city. In the evening, when work was done and families gathered near hearths, the coo of doves, settling in for the night, was sometimes heard faintly through open shutters. Their sound blended with their crackle of firewood and the murmur of quiet conversation, weaving together a scene of peace. For the weary laborer, the dove's call was another reminder that rest had arrived, that the day's struggles could fade into. For children drifting to sleep, it was part of the lullaby of the village, a steady reassurance that the world outside remained calm. The dove's legacy endured not because of grandeur, but because of its quiet constancy. Where some creatures inspired awe through size or danger, the dove inspired affection through. Its symbolism carried across generations, embedded in art, ritual, story, and daily routine. For me, devout people, it was not a distant myth, but a close companion, always present, always reminding them of tenderness amid labor and calm amid noise. The world may have been shaped by hardship, yet the dove showed thy gentleness was never absent, fluttering softly above chapels, resting upon rooftops, and cooing gently into thy heart of life itself. In the stillness of early medieval mornings, before the village had fully awakened and before smoke rose steadily from hearths, the sound of hooves could sometimes be heard upon damp soil or along the hard-packed lanes. Horses, steady and dignified, were often the first creatures to begin the rhythm of the day, their breath misted in the cool air, rising in gentle clouds that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. Villagers watching them begin their work felt a sense of reassurance. A horse did not hurry, yet it never faltered. Its strength was steady, not dramatic, carrying a quiet dignity that people came to rely upon for both survival and ceremony. To walk beside a horse in the dim light of dawn was to feel joined by a companion, whose patience mirrored the slow unfolding of the day. In the medieval imagination, horses were more than mere beasts of burden. They represented resilience and continuity. A plough horse moving through a field was not only turning the soil, it was shaping the year's harvest, guiding the household's hopes for bread and sustenance. The lines of the plough, straight and true, were as much the work of the horse as of the farmer guiding it. Each step pressed the earth into readiness, and each breath carried the weight of both present labor and future provision. In monasteries, chroniclers often noted the importance of horses in agricultural life, recording not only their use but their presence, describing them with words of respect. They were creatures that gave without asking, patient partners in a world where every seat on the road, horses took on another role, companions of travel, merchants guiding carts, messengers carrying words across distances, and pilgrims walking beside laden beasts, all found in horses a measure of reliability. Their hooves struck a rhythm that carried travelers across miles, and in that rhythm, people found the steady beat seemed to measure not only distance but time itself, breaking long journeys into manageable intervals. Villagers expected the sound of horses upon their roads. To hear a horse pass was to be reminded of connections beyond the horizon, of markets in other towns, or of distant kin. Horses linked communities together, stitching the scattered fabric of medieval life with their unhurried but persistent pace. Yet horses were not only laborers. In ceremonies and rituals, they were symbols of dignity. A noble riding into a marketplace did not arrive silently. The horse carried its rider with a kind of gravity, its movements commanding attention, even without intention. In festivals, decorated horses wore garlands or colorful cloth, their presence turning ordinary streets into scenes of celebration. Children marveled at their size, their gentle eyes, and the weightier breath warmed the air. Villagers saw in them a blend of power and calm, strength made graceful by. To witness such an animal was to be reminded that dignity could be quiet, and that strength need not be loud to inspire awe. Daily care for horses was itself a ritual of respect. Stables, though simple, were tended with effort, for to neglect a horse was to neglect the household's livelihood. Farmers brushed their coats, cleaned hooves, and offered feed, not with extravagance but with steady responsibility. Children often learned gentleness by helping, carrying buckets of water or handfuls of hay. The bond between human and horse grew not only in the field or upon the road, but in these small, repeated acts. A horse lowered its head to drink, and the sound of water lapping became part of the stable's quiet music. In such moments, villagers saw the essence of partnership, neither dominance nor subservience, but shared endurance. The presence of horses extended into spirituality as well. Some sermons compared the patience of a working horse to the virtues of humility and service. Chroniclers drew symbolic lessons from their endurance, noting how their steady pace through fields mirrored the persistence of the faithful through life's seasons. Horses were seen as reminders that dignity lay not only in grandeur, but in consistent, patient labor. Their quiet eyes, reflecting torchlight in the evening, seemed to embody strength and gentleness, traits deeply valued in a world that often demanded more than people felt they could give. At fairs and markets, horses were often gathered for sale or trade, their presence marking the pulse of rural economy. Villagers walked among them slowly, speaking in low tones, as though acknowledging the seriousness of such exchanges. To purchase a horse was not only to acquire an animal, but to secure a future of harvests, journeys, and companionship. Buyers looked at shoulders, legs, and hooves, but they also looked at demeanor, seeking patience and steadiness as much as physical strength. Children clung to their parents, staring wide-eyed at rows of animals, their soft snorts filling the air. The market was noisy, but amid the clamor, horses stood calm, their presence grounding the scene. Season after season, horses played their part in the cycles of life. In spring, they helped prepare the fields, their hooves pressing earth loosened by frost. In summer, they pulled wagons laden with hay, their flanks gleaming under sun. Autumn brought heavier loads, carts filled with grain or apples for pressing, the horses' breath rising against the chill. Winter reduced their tasks, but still they hauled wood and carried people across frozen lanes, their steady warmth cutting through the cold. Each season had its labors and horses shared them, shaping the rhythm of human survival with their own enduring pace. Dreams of horses carried meaning as well. To dream of riding a calm horse was said to promise stability and good fortune. To dream of a horse drinking clear water was a sign of health and provision. Villagers shared these interpretations in quiet conversation, adding symbolic weight to the presence of an animal already central to their lives. A dream of a horse running freely across a meadow might be seen as a message of renewal or freedom, offering comfort during times of hardship. These beliefs were not dismissed, but folded gently into daily life, forming part of the quiet network of meanings that gave structure to medieval thought. In literature and story, horses were often placed beside heroes and saints, their roles not of grandeur but of steadfast companionship. They appeared in illuminated manuscripts, drawn with care, often shown as attentive, calm figures. A knight's valor may have filled the tale, but the horse was always there, steady beneath him, carrying the weight without. Villagers hearing such stories saw reflections of their own lives, ordinary labor, patient effort, quiet dignity. The horse's role was a reminder that strength often worked unseen, shaping life not through spectacle but through steady presence. Evenings with horses held their own peace. After the day's work, when tools were set aside and the last carts returned, horses were led back to stables or fields. The sound of their hooves on stones softened into silence, broken only by the rustle of straw or the steady munching of hay. Villagers moved more slowly at this time, fatigue mingling with relief. To stand beside a horse in twilight, feeling its steady warmth and hearing the calm rhythm of its breath, was to feel part of a larger balance, the shared effort of creature and human, sustaining life together. For many, it was a moment of quiet gratitude, a pause before night wrapped the village in stillness. The legacy of horses in medieval life was not built upon speed or grandeur alone, but upon their steady, patient work. They shaped the land, carried burdens, and connected communities. They stood as symbols of dignity without pride, strength without violence, patience without complaint. Their rhythm was third rhythm of survival, their presence a steady reassurance that tasks could be borne, journeys completed, and seasons endured. In a world often filled with uncertainty, horses embodied constancy, walking beside humanity step by step, hoof by hoof, through the long centuries of labor and living. As the hours of the medieval evening deepened, the village grew quieter. The sounds of work and trade had long since faded, and only the crackle of hearth fires and the occasional creak of wooden beams remained. Outside, the air grew cool, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and smoke. Families gathered close to the firelight, and in that circle of warmth and flickering shadow, stories were told. These were not grand tales of kings or wars, but smaller, softer recollections that gave meaning to everyday life. Among them, the animals of field, forest, and sky became companions of the imagination. A rooster's crow, a dog's bark, a blackbird's song all were woven with significance. Each carried something more than itself, a reminder, a warning, a hope. The medieval world was never empty or silent in people's eyes. To them, the landscape was filled with voices and signs, each creature a messenger. beliefs about animals lingered not because they were dramatic, but because they were steady, forming part of the rhythm of days and nights. Just as a candle's flame could soften thick darkness, so too could these ideas soften uncertainty, giving people comfort in the face of mystery. Animals were not simply beasts or tools, they were symbols and teachers, woven into the fabric of spiritual and daily life. By the hearth, elders repeated these stories to children, who listened with wide eyes, learning not only about the creatures themselves, but about the world's order as their parents and grandparents understood it. The tales were never told with urgency or fear, but with calm acceptance, as if the crow of a rooster truly did scatter the night's dangers, or as if a dove's soft flight really did promise peace. In these moments, belief was not a superstition Tobe judged, but a language for explaining life's patterns. Just as villagers depended on bread, milk, or wool, they also depended on the meanings they found in animals, for these meanings carried reassurance. In the chapel, their presence of animals was remembered too. Beeswax candles flickered in the still air, their faint honeyed scent drifting through stone aisles, and in that golden glow people thought of the bee, diligent and ordered. Painted glass showed lambs and doves, symbols of innocence and peace, reminding worshippers that even the simple creatures were tied to divine truths. The natural world, in this view, was not separate from faith but joined to it. Beliefs about animals were not kept outside the walls of religion but carried gently within them, part of the Sama continuous vision that saw God's hand in all things. On quiet roads at dusk, a traveler might hear the call of an owl or the soft movement of a hare. Alone in the growing dark, he would remember what neighbors said, that owl's cry was a warning, or that the hare was tied to the moon. In those solitary moments, such beliefs made deathy night less lonely, filling it with echoes of meaning. They gave shape to what could not otherwise be. In this way, the natural world became both companion and text, something to be read with patience and reverence. The endurance of these beliefs lay not in their accuracy by modern measure, but in their usefulness to medieval lives. To believe that a cow's gentle lowing promised abundance, or that a rooster's crow protected against unseen spirits, was to live in a world where even ordinary sounds and sights offered guidance. It was a way of aligning daily existence with larger patterns, of seeing continuity between survival and mystery. In this sense, animals were like living candles, each one casting a small circle of light on the meaning of the world, pushing back the darkness of uncertainty. In every household, the presence of animals was steady. Cats gurgled at the hearth, dogs barked at gates, horses waited in stables, and doves cooed upon rooftops. These creatures were more than background, they were familiar figures in the daily stage of life. To look at them without belief would have been impossible for most villagers. Belief was not something separate, chosen, or rejected. It was part of seeing, part of listening. A candle was not just wax and wick, it was light. And a creature was not just flesh and bone, it was a sign. The resilience of these ideas can be seen in how they traveled. A child who grew up hearing tales of the stag's renewal or the serpent's wisdom might pass those same stories to their own children, not as strict rules but as gentle truths. The endurance was not forceful but quiet, like the way an old tool is used until it becomes natural in the hand. Over time, the stories became part of the atmosphere of life, less like laws and more like the air itself, always present, always shaping thought without demanding attention. In this way, animals carried the candle of belief from one century to another. Their symbolic meanings flickered and changed, sometimes stronger, sometimes faint, but always alive. The rooster still crowed at dawn, and people still trusted it. The dog still guarded, the dove still softened the heart, the bee still worked in harmony. Even as kingdoms rose and fell, and even as plagues and hardships reshaped communities, these small beliefs endured. They were too closely tied to daily rhythms to be lost, to comfort into, be abandoned. It is easy to imagine, then, the end of a long day in such a village. The light of the fire grows dim, and a single candle is left burning on the table. Shadows stretch against timber walls. Outside, the owl listens, and in that moment, someone at the hearth remembers an old saying that such a sound means change isn't. Perhaps they nod thoughtfully, not with fear but with acceptance. The candle flickers, and its glow steady as silence. In this scene, the beliefs about animals and the flame itself merge into one atmosphere, both simple, both symbolic, both essential to making night feel less vast. The endurance of these beliefs reminds us that people have always sought meaning in the world around them, To live without electricity, without printed books for every home, without quick explanations for natural events, was to rely upon the quiet messages of creatures and seasons. These beliefs were not distractions from survival, but part of it, adding depth to a life already filled with labor. They gave people ways to understand time, to soften fear, and to connect the ordinary with thesis. As centuries passed, the meanings of animals shifted. Some beliefs faded, others were reshaped, but the memory of them lingers. Even today, we still call someone wise as an owl, loyal as a dog, gentle as a lamb, or busy as a bee. These phrases are the distant echoes of medieval thought, carried across time like embers kept alive. They showed that the candle of belief did not extinguish when the medieval age ended. Its light stretched forward, glowing faintly in the words and images we still use, even when we no longer think of their origins. To close our wandering through this medieval world, imagine again that village night. The streets are silent, the hearths fading, and in one house a single candle burns low. Around it sit a family, children half asleep, listening to the soft voice of an elder telling of animals that guard, guide, or comfort. Outside, the creatures themselves move quietly through fields and forests, their presence unchanged, their meanings alive in human thought. The candle's flame trembles, then steadies, casting its glow upon the circle of faces. In that small light, faith, nature, and daily life are bound together into one enduring story. The animals remain, the beliefs remain, and the night is no longer empty. The candle of belief, though simple, continues to burn, sometimes faint, sometimes bright, beautiful ways, steady enough to light the way through the darkness of uncertainty. It is this endurance that marks the medieval vision, not a world of plain survival, but a world rich with meaning, carried in the eyes of animals, and kept alive in the quiet of human hearts. As we reach the close of this journey through medieval belief, we find ourselves standing in a world that was never empty, never silent. The people of those centuries lived surrounded by creatures that were more than just background to their survival. To them, each animal carried a quiet lesson, a sign, or a blessing. The rooster's crow, breaking the night with its sudden voice, was not simply a sound of farm life, which was proof that light had triumphed once more, that the shadows had been scattered, and that morning had safely returned. The cat Nerthharth was not merely a mouser, but a keeper of mysteries, a watcher with eyes that glowed in the dark, a companion, and yet a reminder of secrets untold. The owl's silence filled the night with awe, teaching people that wisdom often came clothed in stillness, and that some truths could only be approached with reverence. The stage in the forest, slipping between shadows and shafts of light, became a noble figure of purity and renewal, its antlers falling and growing again as though to mirror life's own cycles. The bees at their hives, humming in perfect order, showed both villagers and monks what discipline and harmony looked like, weaving sweetness out of diligence. Dogs lay at doorways or stood at the sides of masters, their loyalty so steady that people began to believe it stretched beyond life itself. As if these faithful companions might guard the very soul, the hare darting through spring fields seemed tied to the moon, a small and gentle reminder of rhythms that connected Earth Toski. The serpent, feared and yet respected, shed its skin in quiet renewal, its body a moving emblem of both caution and hidden wisdom. Cows stood in misty pastures, their slow chewing and steady breath a background to daily peace. Their milk and strength fed the household, but their patience and calm reminded people of abundance and fertility, of the land's endless giving. The blackbird sang at evening, its song carrying across hedges, as if to tell weary laborers that rest was near. The lamb, small and fragile in springtime fields, reminded villagers of purity and sacrifice, its very presence a soft promise that life continued gently forward after winter's long trials. Fish swam unseen beneath river surfaces, their silent movements likened to endurance, patience, and hidden worlds. The dove's coo, soft against chapel stones or rooftops, became a living emblem of peace and tenderness, a blessing both ordinary and divine. Horses, with their breath misting in cold air, carried not only burdens but dignity, strength, and companionship in every step of their labor. And finally, the candle itself, shaped of wax, set alight by flame, stood as a symbol of belief enduring, of how stories and meanings flicker against the darkness of uncertainty. Taken together, These creatures created a world where survival was never-ending physical. The animals around medieval people shaped their imagination, their prayers, their songs, their fears, and their hopes. To live in such a world was to walk among signs. The farmer who rose at dawn heard not just a rooster, but the scattering of spirits. The child who saw a dove alight on a windowsill believed peace had come close to their home. The traveler who glimpsed an owl at midnight understood that change, perhaps sorrowful, might soon arrive. Each moment in daily life became larger than itself, a window into the mysterious pattern of existence. This way of seeing was not naive. It was careful, observant, and deeply connected to rhythms of land and season. People depended on animals in material ways, but belief gave those relationships a deeper layer. The cow did not only provide milk, it embodied nurturing abundance. The bee did not only give, it showed spiritual order. In a life that could be harsh, filled with hunger, disease, and uncertainty, these beliefs softened the edges. They allowed people to imagine that they were not simply laboring against hardship, but participating in a world filled with meaning. Every bleat, every song, every flicker of movement could be read like a line in a book. The endurance of these beliefs tells us something about human nature. Across centuries, across languages and kingdoms, people looked at animals and saw more than bodies in motion. They saw reflections of themselves, of their virtues and flaws, their cycles and struggles. They saw teachers, and in doing so, they made their lives larger than survival. They created a quiet poetry out of theory. Even today, when we call someone loyal as a dog, wise as an owl, or busy as a bee, we echo those medieval voices. The words may no longer carry the same spiritual weight, but they carry memory. They remind us that the bond between humans and animals has always been about more than utility. It has always been about meaning. So, as we close this series, picture again that candle on the wooden table around it sit families, shadows flickering against the walls, children leaning close as elders tell stories of creatures who guide, or warn. Outside, the night is vast and mysterious, but inside, the circle of light is. Within that glow, animals live not only in pastures, fields, and skies, but in imagination, woven into faith and tradition. The candle burns, and in its flame all these beliefs endure, small, steady, and warm. The medieval people may be gone, their villages quiet now, their chapels in ruin, their fields long since changed, but their way of seeing still lingers. It lingers in our words, in our symbols, in our quiet admiration of the creatures that share our lives. Their world was one where every animal carried a story, every sound held a message, and every presence was part of a greater whole. That world, though past, still whispers to us when we pause to listen. It reminds us that life, however ordinary, can always be seen as meaningful, if only we allow ourselves to see the light in its simplest forms. The final truth of this journey is not about superstition or forgotten lore. It is about, just as a candle continues to burn until the last drop of wax is gone, so too do beliefs carry forward, flickering but unextinguished, from one generation to the next. And as long as people continue to live among animals, to hear their voices, to watch their movements, and to wonder about their place in the world, the candle of belief will never truly go out.